Believe me, I struggle hard to be my own devil's.
That was a much more fair summary than I expected. And he was right. The ICJ didn't even address the question of granting that ceasefire. They didn't do it at all. Okay. I was worried that the Finkelstein would be really dumb. Okay, maybe Finkelstein just debated really dumb people. This analysis is really good. Do you think there's a genocide happening?
The fact that the ICJ is the official juridical body of the United Nations, and virtually all the documentation, those voluminous, those hundreds of footnotes, came from UN agencies, which means if you...
This is a red flag for me. I'm gonna be honest, it's only after the Irving stuff do I consider it a red flag, but then also with Finkelstein, I consider it a red flag now. I feel like there's gotta be some historian thing where when you cite number of footnotes, it makes me really suspect about like what you're talking about. Like hundreds of footnotes doesn't necessarily make it good research. I don't know, that is an iffy, I don't know, it's a red flag to me. Maybe it's not though. I mean, again, I'm saying this low levels of conviction. Maybe I don't know enough to say.
Find against South Africa, you're finding against virtually every agency affiliated with the United Nations, because all of the documentation comes from UN agencies. So that puts a special burden on the justices, the judges in the ICJ, that they would not only be rebuffing the South African delegation, but they would be rebuffing UNRWA, its director, Mr. Lazzarini. They would be rebuffing the Undersecretary for Humanitarian Affairs, Michael Griffiths. They would be rebuffing the Secretary General, Gutierrez. He made a lot of very strong statements. I myself was very surprised because the Secretary Generals are often terrified of saying anything strong in this subject because of the obvious reason the United States is going to express a strong dissent. So that was its strength, in my opinion. The weakness, and I discussed it at some length with Mouin, he can confirm what we've already discussed or disagree with me. The main weakness in the South African position is this. The ICJ has to uphold the rights of every party to the conflict. So obviously, the Gazans have the right not to be the subject of a genocide. That's straightforward. So the ICJ could find that Israel is committing a genocide, and we have the right to take provisional measures to prevent Israel from carrying on a genocide. The main provisional measure that South Africa wants is a ceasefire. But the ceasefire would only restrict Israel. Hamas is not a party to the proceedings. And Israel's response is, if you impose a ceasefire on us, it's unilateral, and therefore you are denying us our right of self-defense. And I think that's a strong argument, because there's a consensus that Israel has the right to self-defense at bare minimum until the hostages are returned, but also the claim that they want to dismantle Hamas. Many people accept that as a legitimate war aim. And the question then is, how do you restrict Israel's right to fight, namely impose a ceasefire on it, without also restricting its quote-unquote inalienable right to self-defense? And that's going to be a very difficult problem for ICJ, not in the question of whether there is a plausible case for genocide. I think we can go into it. I think they've made a plausible case. But when it comes to what provisional measures are you going to impose on Israel, whether a ceasefire will pass muster, my guess is no. Turning now to the Israeli case, I try to be, believe me, I struggle hard to be my own devil's...
That was a much more fair summary than I expected. And he was right. The ICJ didn't even address the question of granting that ceasefire. They didn't do it at all.
Advocate. To look at it, give it a fair hearing, and decide. I would say, when I first heard it, I thought they made some case. But on the second reading and the third reading, my conclusion is, and I don't think it's a biased conclusion, they made no case for a very simple reason. Every assertion they made is based on evidence from their own side. They were unable to adduce any evidence to refute those 101 UN agencies. So the UN agency says, we're on the verge of mass famine in Gaza. And Israel says, well, actually, the humanitarian situation is still very poor, but things are improving. Where's your evidence? Well, they can't cite any evidence because no UN agency is saying that. And so on the crucial question of evidence to support their claims, there was one reference to the World Food Program, one reference to UNICEF, one in each. But with those exceptions, every single piece of evidence. Are Hamas fighters hiding in hospitals? Are there tunnels under the hospitals? So on, so on, so on, so on. There's no evidence they can cite except what the Israeli government claims. And I think on those grounds alone, the case collapses. And then we can go into the claims they make that genocide is not occurring there. I can go through it. But my overall impression is the South African case holds up on the question of a plausible claim of genocide, but they are going to run into trouble on the question of what provisional measures the ICJ can impose on Israel.
Can I ask, just to that interesting point about where the limits of Israel's self-defense begins and ends? I mean, this is such a crucial question.
Can somebody link me the Israeli response so that I can have their response up as well? And I'll probably read that off stream or something.
I just was looking at some legal analysis from the legal website Jurist, and this is what they have to say. They said that under international law, The West Bank and the Gaza Strip have been duly recognized as militarily occupied territories since 1967. Israel, as the occupant, has the right to protect itself and its citizens from attacks by Palestinians within these territories. However, Israel also has a responsibility to maintain law and order, ensuring the security and well-being of the occupied population, as outlined in Regulation 43 of the Regulations Concerning the Laws and Customs of War on Land. That being said, it does seem to be the case that there's a real legitimate question here about whether or not the wildly disproportionate slaughter of Palestinian civilians in particular has gotten us to a point where there might have been some ambiguity or an argument to be made by Israel in the days or even a couple of weeks following October 7th. Is it really the case that we think there's a reasonable argument that what Israel is doing in self-defense?
Purpose of law of armed conflict: not to make wars fair, but to protect civilians. Following international law of armed conflict, nothing to do with number of dead on each side. This is going to be a big part.
We're at 24,000 plus dead Gazans, not to mention the many statements outlining the plan for collective punishment, ethnic cleansing, and the like that are detailed in so much detail in the South African submission.
Totally agree. I'll just answer that briefly, and then I want to hear Mouin's opinion. The problem there is the ICJ always has the option of saying, we admonish Israel when exercising its right of self-defense to obey the laws of war, IHL, international humanitarian law. But it would be very hard for them to say, because you have engaged in indiscriminate attacks, targeted attacks on civilians and civilian objects, disproportionate attacks, therefore we deprive you of any right to self-defense. What they can say is, we deprive you of the right, or we're admonishing you that in the exercise of your legitimate right to self-defense, which we recognize,
you can't neglect the rules of proportionality. He's right here. So you need to not do the bad attacks, but you continue to defend yourself, right?
Admonishing you that you have to obey international humanitarian law. That's how I see it, but let's hear from Mouin.
Yeah.
Thank you. I think it's important to understand that this case is solely and exclusively about genocide. In other words, the
I don't know if you know this, but looking into what plausible actually means for the ICJ would be pretty good. Plausible is like the lowest standard of anything happening. Plausible just means that, like, given the facts you assert, and if publicly we can see that, like, you're not completely making shit up, then we would say, like, okay, sure, it's plausible, as long as they fit the elements of whatever it is you're contesting. Or not contesting, asserting. So, like, if you say, for instance, like, it's plausible that, these two people are dating, and then somebody, links a Twitter post where two people are standing outside holding hands, like, okay, it's plausible. And, like, that's all you need, basically. Yeah.
International Court of Justice is not going to judge whether Israel is obeying the laws of war. If the judges believe that Israel is committing war crimes and crimes against humanity, they will make very clear that that is none of their business, and they won't offer an opinion of it, because South Africa brought its case under the 1948 Genocide Convention, and anything that is outside that convention, including war crimes and crimes against humanity and indiscriminate bombing and all the rest of it, falls outside the boundaries of this case. That would be my first observation. So,
sorry, you're being too charitable. No real court would say something is plausible based on some quotes. I think plausibility, is what's required to file civil cases in the United States. Where's Peace Squad? I think that's the standard you're looking for. Is it plausible that so, for instance, if I go to a court and I make a complaint and I say, this person owes me rent, okay? Here's the lease that they signed, and then here's my bank statements, and they haven't paid me, right? The court would look at that complaint, and they would say that the prima facie case has been met, okay? Your complaint seems plausible. You provided some documentation, and they're breaking an agreement, a contract that they had, so whatever tort laws or statutes apply. So yeah, you've got a case. It's plausible. Plausibility is the I think that's the burden of proof that you need for to submit an initial complaint to a court, and then obviously the other side can respond with motions before anything actually goes to court order. But yeah, there has never been a genocide case that was dismissed as not plausible. Sure, but people probably also don't submit cases about genocide where it's not at least plausible, right? Yeah. Destiny, yeah, you provide evidence, not just a text message from the guy saying, hey, I think I might owe you some money. Yeah, sure, but it's very, very, very light evidence. Plausible is a very, very low standard. Pretrial stuff is a very low standard.
What South Africa now needs to do is not demonstrate that Israel is in fact perpetrating genocide, but make a persuasive argument that there's a plausible case to be judged by the International Court of Justice. In that, I think they will succeed. As far as provisional measures are concerned, I think the judges...
both of these, okay. I was worried that the Finkelstein would be really dumb. Okay, maybe Finkelstein just debated really dumb people. This analysis is really good. Neither of these guys have said anything dumb or stupid. They have it feels to me at least, they have a really good understanding of everything going on so far. Okay, this is good. This is refreshing.
Are most likely not going to even consider South Africa's main demand of a ceasefire. And this will have less to do, I think, with the issues Norm raised, than more to do with precedent. I looked at, there are 3 previous genocide cases that appeared before the International Court of Justice. Bosnia in 1993, Myanmar in 2019, and Ukraine in 2022. In the Bosnia and Myanmar cases, the International Court of Justice did not order a ceasefire or cessation of hostilities. All it did is call upon the accused party to strictly observe the provisions of the Genocide Convention and not to violate any of them. The only time it called for a ceasefire was in the case of Ukraine, but that was a very different case. Ukraine was not accusing Russia of genocide. Ukraine made the argument that Russia utilized accusations of genocide against Ukraine as the justification for its invasion of Ukraine, and that therefore the ICJ should declare that Russia needs to cease military operations on Ukrainian territory. So it's a very, it's not a good analogy with what we're seeing now. And secondly, I think the question of a ceasefire is only of limited relevance because the ICJ does not have any enforcement powers. The only method through which its rulings can be enforced is by the UN.
Yeah, I think UN stuff, right? Like sanctions and shit.
It does not have any enforcement powers. The only method through which its rulings can be enforced is by the UN Security Council.
So a Security Council could like sanction states, or UN Security Council could approve a mission, I guess, a military mission or whatever. But yeah.
And as we know, the U.S. is a permanent member of the Security Council and will veto anything.
Which could theoretically veto literally anything, yeah. But, I mean, that's going to depend, to be fair, on the strength of the ICJ case. The ICJ can prove 1 billion% a genocide is happening, and statements come out, and investigation is like, even the U.S. is not going to support Israel through that. Like, we're going to... But, I mean, realistically, Israel won't get that far because they know they'd lose the support of the U.S. and they'd be f***ed. If the U.S. is voting to abstain, then on, like, votes like this, you're in big trouble.
Enforced is by the UN Security Council. And as we know, the U.S. is a permanent member of the Security Council and will veto anything that adversely affects Israel. And so I think we need to look at this not only in legal, but also in moral and political terms. And I think the mere fact that this case was presented to the International Court of Justice, the mere fact that the ICJ accepted to hear this case, and the extremely high likelihood that the ICJ will move forward with this case. In other words, it will determine that South Africa presented a plausible case for further investigation. And, you know, there is always a likelihood it will call for a ceasefire, although I consider that extremely unlikely for both the reasons Noor mentioned and the ones I referred to. I think these together will taint Israel until the end of its days. I think the charge of genocide is going to stick to Israel eternally, irrespective of how the ICJ ends up ruling in the end several years down the line. And given that Israel presents itself as a state that was founded in response to the Nazi Holocaust, and given that Israel has justified many of its most depraved policies as in effect necessary to prevent a second Holocaust, and now Israel stands formally accused before the world's highest court of perpetrating genocide, I think for that sector of global public opinion, and here I'm referring mainly to Western public opinion, that has always given Israel a pass on so many issues because of the history of persecution of European Jewry and the Nazi Holocaust. I think this case, simply by existing, will fundamentally and irrevocably alter perceptions of Israel in the public sphere. And that is what I think is the main value of this case, without, you know, detracting from the substantive and legal issues.
That's a really scary statement. I don't like that. The idea that, like, well, you know, maybe they're not doing it, but at least the accusation is like a really big, you know, fuck you to them. That seems to be like an unhealthy weaponization of international courts. Verbatim record. What is this? Israeli oral arguments against the genocide stuff? Public sitting held on Friday, January 12th. A case concerning application of the Convention on the Prevention of Punishment, the Crime of Genocide in the Gaza Strip. South Africa via Israel, verbatim record. Le gouvernement. The President, please be seated. The sitting is open. The court meets this Monday to hear the State of Israel presented a single round of oral arguments on the request for the indication of provisional measures submitted by the Republic of South Africa on the 20th of December 2023 on the case concerning application of the Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide in the Gaza Strip. I shall now give the floor to the co-agent of Israel, Mr. Tal Becker. You have the floor, Excellency. Okay. So this is these are Israel's opening arguments. Oh my God, imagine how cool it would be if half this document was in French and it's actually only like 36 pages. No, that's not what happened. Fuck. Okay.
That Norman has raised.
I'd like to comment briefly on that, and then obviously I'd like to hear from the two hosts of the program. I think the point Mouin made is very germane to what seems like an unrelated issue, but I think it's very related. Namely, the strange evolution in the mainstream coverage of the Israel-Palestine conflict, in this case Gaza, in particular the Times, which is an old-timer.
New York Times,
which is an old-timer, is still the newspaper of record in my mind's eye. At the beginning, the Times was typically the Times, making all these apologies to the state of Israel. And
if I can just interrupt you, I'd just like to recall that on October 8th, the Times published an editorial entitled "A Time for Unity and Resolve," basically calling for the promotion of Israel's war aims and for them to be achieved.
I forgot that, to be honest.
You blotted it out, repressed memory.
In any event, But as Israel's barbarism became impossible to ignore, the Times coverage was actually quite good. You could judge it not just by the content of the articles, but the pictures that were illustrating the articles. They were heart-wrenching. I will tell you, I have not watched 1 minute of any video footage on Gaza or even on October 7th. I won't watch it. I'm kind of like Professor Chomsky. He only refers to a written record. Even if there's a movie in his life, he'll only refer to the written transcript. He will never refer to the actual film. And I'm sort of the same way. I didn't watch anything. But the coverage was surprisingly good. But then it again abruptly changed and got awful. And it got awful when the issue of genocide came up. And I think it's the reason that Mouin just suggested. Israel is, after all, the state of the Jewish people. That's its official title. And if the genocide charge sticks for the editors of the Times, it's not just the state of Israel whose name has been tainted, as Mouin put it, till the end of time, but it's the Jews who are tainted with the charge of genocide. Because old-timers, who run the Times, the editors, they still see this Israel as being their, T-H-E-I-R, their state. And the idea of this eternal scarlet letter, the Jewish state, has been tainted with the scarlet letter of genocide.
I wonder how true that is. I need to talk to old Jews in the US. I wonder how loyal they see themselves to like the state of Israel, or if they have that like Zionist feel in them as much as people that live there. I truly have no idea. I could see it going either way.
They cannot abide that. That's a bridge too far. And so now the paper has become just, again, a propaganda organ for Israel. So one day they resurrect, I'm not saying if it's true or false, I'm simply saying for the 100th time, they resurrect the rapes issue. I mean, it was already on October 8th, October 9th, it was already an issue, but then they suddenly resurrected it with apparently a very shoddy article. Then they raised this issue of the 430 miles of tunnels in Gaza.
Wasn't it 4,300?
No, yeah, which is, as far as I could tell, a physical impossibility. I can't claim to be an expert, and I'm trying to consult civil engineers on the issue, but that would mean every 1,200 feet along the width of Gaza, every 1,200 feet, there's a 25-mile tunnel stretching the whole length of Gaza. That's not plausible to me. In any event, so then they started to run with that. Then they had an article the other day saying that people are now walking freely in northern Gaza, whereas the humanitarian organizations were saying there were pockets of famine in northern Gaza. And I think the reason is because, on the ICJ, they still read the Times. Don't kid yourself. The Times is still the newspaper of record for the judges on the court. And so they're doing everything they can to get a not guilty verdict, because for those old-timers on the New York Times editorial board, that's crossing a red line. Our state, the state of the Jewish people, to be accused of genocide.
You remind me of what the newly minted French foreign minister said about this case. He said, to accuse the Jewish state of genocide, that crosses a moral threshold.
Right. You can't call a Jewish state genocide.
Both sides of this are cringe. The secular Jews in the founding of Israel were so much more based than this. Netanyahu screaming about anti-Semitism all the time. These guys screaming about it's such soy posting. It's soy posting. I say that though. I mean, I could understand it too, though. I can understand the soy posting on both sides. Seeing a lot of people criticize Israel, a lot of it does start to feel. I'm going to be honest, and I think this was an unpopular take when I gave it on stream, but I felt something weird when Cenk was screaming about how Israelis love to watch Palestinian dogs die in the streets. I was like, bro, are you okay? You're on some otherworldly shit right now. It felt weird. And then a lot of this shit on Twitter, I feel like anti-Israel, anti-Zionist stuff bleeds into anti-Semitic shit really quickly. So I can understand why Jewish people would feel frustrated. I can also understand on Norm's end how if you criticize Israel, depending on where you're at, maybe everybody says oh, are you being anti-Semitic? Oh, are you being anti-Semitic? Oh, are you being anti-Semitic? Remember the Holocaust, bro? Oh, right. So I mean, I'm sure there's a lot of probably scar tissue and mutual trauma built up on both sides for this.
About this case, he said, to accuse the Jewish state of genocide, that crosses a moral threshold.
Right. You can't call a Jewish state genocide. He didn't say whether it was factually true or not. It was a moral imperative. If it's a Jewish state, you can't call it genocidal. He didn't look at the evidence. He didn't care.
And that's precisely how they've been able to get away with it, because people find the allegation more offensive than the actual genocide happening, because it speaks to a total hypocrisy.
Well, Blinken worked himself into a frenzy, dismissing it as meritless. And then the Germans worked themselves into an even greater frenzy, effectively saying, we're recognized global leaders in genocide. Trust us when we give our opinion on this. This case is an outrage.
Yeah, the hypocrisy of Israel charging South Africa with kind of being disqualified from weighing in because they experienced apartheid or something. How dare you point out apartheid if you have experienced apartheid firsthand, but then turning around and saying,
I feel like 100% of both sides easily bleed into anti-Semitism or Islamophobia or whatever you want to call racism towards Arabs. Maybe, but the problem is Islam is a factor when it comes to Hamas. So it's hard to say that these two things are comparable, right? Judaism or Orthodox Judaism might be an issue when it comes to settler stuff in the West Bank, sure, but Palestinians have an Islam, when your two big parties are Hamas and the Palestinian Islamic Jihad, you have a problem. It's not good.
Oh, yes, but believe Germany, because they're the experts in genocide, was really quite rich. I mean, Katie, I wonder what you make of some of this. You've done so much good media criticism at Useful Idiots and on your show. And I wonder if you have a similar read as to Norm about the kind of trajectory of New York Times coverage, or whether you have anything to add to that. Because I do suspect that some people listening might bristle a little bit at the idea that there was ever a time when the New York Times coverage could be described as good, even though I take Norm's point that the gravity of what is happening in Gaza is so extreme that even bad or skewed or biased coverage that includes basic photographic evidence and a basic accounting of lives lost, even if you say Hamas death toll numbers, all of that, is still a compelling case for humanitarian.
PIJ is much, much smaller than Hamas. Aren't they the second largest group that operates in the Gaza Strip? Am I wrong about that?
Intervention in Gaza.
Yeah, I think that one of the most creative things that the New York Times and a lot of legacy print media does is that they make it a mystery who does the killing. So there's a lot of use of passive voice. There's a lot of description of deaths, people killed, people lost. I think that's one of the ways that the New York Times and other similar outlets, that their bias towards Israel is shown consistently, kind of regardless of whether or not they do, as Norm pointed out. I mean, there are times when I think just by virtue of reporting, the evidence is so overwhelmingly, there's so much violence, death, and destruction that it's hard without lying to sugarcoat it. But they are creative in the way that they whitewash it. And in the other direction, I think, as Norm referred to, and when we've spoken about this briefly, and I know you've done shows on this, Brie, but the coverage of the rape allegations has been fairly abysmal. And it's just kind of a game of telephone where claims are made, claims are referred to, and no one actually looks at where the claims are from. And then they were made in the New York Times, so now everyone else can cite them because it's from the New York Times. The New York Times is so reputable.
Right.
And if I could just give one incident, I think it was about a week ago before the ICJ case. Suddenly you had the story in the New York Times citing unnamed senior American intelligence officials confirming Israeli allegations that there was a command center and tunnel network and all the rest of it below Al-Shifa Hospital in Gaza City, the main hospital in the Gaza Strip. I don't need to repeat what the allegations were.
I don't think the tunnel shit, now that I've read through Protective Edge and Cast Lead, the tunnel stuff should be obvious. That should be like, there are tunnels everywhere, including under Al-Shifa in Gaza. That would be like, yeah, duh. I mean, like, there always have been. I don't even think that, I'm surprised it's even controversial at this point. I think there were even quotes of, I took this up as like I think I need to find the exact source on, but I think there were accusations of Hamas hiding in Al-Shifa hospital, and I think these were sourced by multiple people, and this is in 2008. In 2015, Amnesty International said that they saw that Al-Shifa Hospital was used for interrogations and torture, extrajudicial killings and stuff. This was a report they released in 2015 that was going over stuff related to Protective Edge, which was 2014. Like, the idea that Al-Shifa Hospital tunnels and stuff, that doesn't even seem, I'm surprised it's even controversial, but I don't know.
And tunnel network and all the rest of it below Al-Shifa Hospital in Gaza City, the main hospital in the Gaza Strip. I don't need to repeat what the allegations were and what happened, but I found it quite telling. The story had been dead for weeks in the mainstream media. Then a few days prior to the Times article, there was a very lengthy and detailed article in the Washington Post that basically dismissed all the Israeli claims. And then suddenly you had the New York Times article. And whereas when the issue was very current, you had U.S. Diplomats and political leaders making all kinds of allegations and sourcing them to U.S. intelligence. You never actually had a U.S. intelligence source speaking directly to journalists. Now, all of a sudden, they were being anonymously quoted. And I think it's exactly what Norm said. You know, Israel needed to be provided with a few slam dunks on the eve of the ICJ case. And given how much the Israelis repeatedly referred to human shields and every civilian installation being a Hamas base or a weapons depot and so on, I would look at it in that context.
I don't think his analysis is wrong here. There could be some coordination here where people in the State Department or the White House are like, listen, okay, I know, whatever, you might talk to the Washington Post, like, we need to leak through whatever communications that we've heard from Israel, that this shit is happening, blah, blah, blah. That wouldn't surprise me that this kind of like propaganda game is being played. But then why no mention of the propaganda games ever being played by Hamas? Like, for instance, that huge claim that the what was the hospital for the parking lot? This haunted Israel for weeks. For that hospital, and was it Al-Ali? Like, this haunted Israel for weeks, that they had bombed a hospital and killed like 500 children dying of leukemia. And this was all over the media, but there's like never any mention of the propaganda from the other side, you know? Like, everybody does a little bit of propagandas here. I think it's really bad if it's fake. That should be big things that we call out, right? But
It's definitely been on television. I mean, we've been focusing on that a bunch on Useful Idiots, but
it wasn't Al-Shifa. Al-Shifa was the one that the IDF invaded and took over, that they said was a command and control for Hamas. That they did the videos of them walking through that had the bunker system underneath. But the Al-Hi Hospital was the one that, when that parking lot thing blew up, it was probably a failed rocket from, I think from Islamic Jihad is what eventually I think people kind of said it was probably a failed mortar that landed in the parking lot and blew up. People were saying that Israel J-dammed the hospital. Ali.
Out is there was a 3 or 4 year old baby killed, and the anchor referred to her as a young woman. She's Palestinian, of course.
Similarly, I'm sorry.
No,
to your point, there was just before the ICJ presentation, Netanyahu came out with a statement saying, well, of course, we don't have any intention to do any ethnic cleansing. Of course, there's no permanent resettlement plans. It seemed to be immediately anticipating that that was central to the claims that were made in the South African briefing. Put out just literally a day or two before the ICJ. And then you saw in the Israeli case before the ICJ, them making reference to those statements that had very clearly been laid as foundation as proof that Netanyahu didn't actually have any intention of engaging in any of the clearly documented statements from any number of people in government that were pointing to the plan to ethnically cleanse, push Gazans permanently out, permanently destroy every building, permanently resettle the population.
Well, part of the timing was just positively amusing because their delegation at the ICJ, the Israeli delegation, they leaned not insignificantly. I won't say it was the whole of their argument, but it leaned not insignificantly. Their presentation was, I think, January 12th. It leaned on the statement made by Netanyahu on January 10th. As if,
yes.
They said, can you just make a statement that we can quote?
Right,
exactly.
In our reply. It was so thin. It was so thin.
transparent.
At some point, well, let's continue, because there are some issues I'd like to get to, but maybe we'll get to in the course of the conversation. So let's hear from you.
Well, I know that you, Norm, had wanted to discuss 2 figures in the hearing. One is Malcolm Shaw, the lawyer who had a fairly viral moment, the British lawyer who represented Israel. Another one is Aharon Barak. We have very short clips of each of them. Shall we show them and then discuss them?
Well, let's start with Malcolm Shaw.
Okay, so let's take a look at Malcolm Shaw, who had this viral moment in which he became a bit of a detective.
The court was prepared to consider not only the question of the plausibility of rights. Well, someone has shuffled my papers. Well, but also the question.
What is your strategy to pierce through Norman's constant appeal to empathy? I think I have to do big appeals to international law. So it sounds cold to say, listen, Israel has a right to defend itself. But when you start making statements that a country doesn't have a right to defend itself, regardless of if they have a good reason for war, which Israel does. If you start to make excuses that human shields or civilian populations make it impossible to conduct warfare, 2 things could happen. One thing, maybe, but not really. The second thing, absolutely. The first thing that could happen, which isn't the worst case scenario, by the way, but a bad thing that could happen is terrorist groups are emboldened to operate among civilian populations, knowing that the international community will support them so long as the civilian casualty toll is high enough. That's a bad thing. We don't want that, okay? But there is a worse outcome, okay? That would be a bad outcome. The worst outcome is international law, or the law of armed conflict, is no longer taken seriously because now nations realize, oh, well, if my opponent engages in asymmetrical warfare, the international is going to condemn me anyway. This, I don't care anymore, okay? I'm not going to risk any of my soldiers. I'm not going to risk any of my munitions, and I'm not going to waste expensive bombs and precision-guided targeting bullshit when I'm going to get accused of anything anyway. I'm just going to bomb everything. You don't remember, international law does not exist just to defend civilians, and it doesn't exist at all to make war fair. International law of armed conflict very delicately tries to balance out the protection of people who aren't parties to combat, people who are hors de combat, and a country's right to conduct war for good reasons, okay? For your use ad bellum reasons, for good and noble causes to go to war. That balance is essential because when the balance falls, all of it goes. If countries are no longer allowed to go to war, even with good reason or good cause, then countries just aren't going to follow any international law. They say, well, this is just stupid, right? And through all of the Geneva Conventions, through all customary international law, through every negotiated treaties and all UN statements, people are always cognizant of this. You have to be very careful in balancing these 2 things because when it falls to one side, nobody wants to follow it, right?
Of the possible breach of such rights.
Quite a moment.
I'm not a believer. My parents were resolute atheists, and it would be a betrayal of their memory where I'd become a believer. But at that particular moment, I did think there was some divine intervention to rattle.
Have you read any of Morris's books yet? No, I've read 2 papers of his, one in response to Finkelstein and another relating to evidence that he finds. Morris seems like a really honest guy. Just in terms of reading and how he reevaluates the positions or whatever, Benny Morris seems like a pretty honest dude. If I disagree with Morris, it's going to be on philosophy stuff. He seems like I would be really scared to disagree with Benny Morris on any historical fact. He spends way too much fucking time like digging through that shit and knowing every fucking thing. Finkelstein will be dead in any historical conversation, at least pre-67. I don't know how much time Benny Morris spends on like war stuff, like 6-Day War, Yom Kippur, stuff like past like the 48 stuff, but it feels like prior to 48. So for the Yishuv, everything from the 1880s and onwards, and then everything having to do with the War of Independence and the Arab-Israeli Civil War, I think Benny knows like every fact that any human, or at least he's written more, I think, than any individual has. He spent more time digging through archives, declassified information, stuff that's been reclassified. Benny Morris is like a fucking, at least from what he's written, seems like an encyclopedia on that shit. I would be very scared to disagree with him on any of that.
Mr. Shaw, I find him a particularly revolting character. He has the moral stature of something a cross between a used car salesman and a personal injury lawyer. He has a very impressive academic record. Actually, I discovered I have sitting on my bookshelf, I think it's an 800-page textbook of his international law. But I did go back, read some of his submissions, because he's basically Israel's official lawyer. In this particular case, in his first statement, he had to deal with two issues. Number one, is this a dispute between Israel and South Africa? Is there a dispute? And he used all these technical arguments to prove it doesn't.
He's also super willing to bring forth evidence that pushes against his ideological beliefs. True, that was one of the most recent papers I read, was that there was evidence of, I think Benny Morris did a, I think he calls this a rejoinder. So Benny Morris looks, one of the things I think he spent a lot of time looking for is, were there evidence of top-down orders relating to the expulsion of Arabs in certain territories? And when he does find evidence of these things, he'll publish like updated articles, I think. Wait, was this the one? No, wait. This is a Norman Finkelstein response to Benny Morris. Fuck, I'm not gonna be able to find it. But he published a paper relating to stuff that he had uncovered. But yeah, he seems like a really honest guy in terms of like, he doesn't come in with just like, this is my political point of view. But I mean, what do I know? I mean, maybe he does, and I don't have the background to fight on that. But oh, fuck, I read this before, and I'm not going to find it again. But whatever, it's not that important.
Qualify as a dispute. Now, I recognize in law, I have to defer to Briahna Joy Gray, there are all these technicalities which, to some extent, fly in the face of what common sense tells you. But there has to be some connection. Whatever legal technicality there is, there has to be some connection with a word as everybody understands its meaning. Now, the ICJ rules, I think it's Article 9, says we entertain disputes, and there are two basic criteria for disputes. One is a personal exchange between the two parties. Another is what they call an expression in what are called multilateral forums, like the United Nations and all sorts of other places. Now,
what do you think about Benny's conclusion of there are 22 Arab states? I don't think we need another one. One Jewish state is fine. I feel it on an emotional side. When there are so many different Arab states, and the Palestinians are like, we need to come back here, and like Jewish people are like, okay, listen, okay, we got one, all right? We have one, okay? I get it.
South Africa says Israel is committing genocide. Israel says it's not committing genocide. I think any reasonable person has to conclude there is a dispute here.
Especially when Israel is denouncing South Africa as Hamas's illegal arm of Hamas.
Well, they also said, Israel said that South Africa is complicitous in genocide, because one of the grounds for indictment of a genocide is if you are complicit in genocide. So they said because South Africa hosts Hamas, South Africa has good diplomatic relations with Hamas, they say South Africa is a party to genocide. Now, how in God's name can there possibly be any doubt that a dispute exists? So along comes Malcolm Shaw, and he says things like this. South Africa never told us that they disagree with us about genocide. So they say, Malcolm Shaw, he says very cleverly, or he thinks cleverly, he says, there's not a dispute, there is a unispute. There's not a dispute, okay, I would say too clever by half. Then he says, South Africa forgets it takes two to tango. No, it didn't forget it takes two to tango. One side says there's a genocide going on, Israel is committing it. The other side says there's no genocide going on, we're not committing anything. So how in the face of common sense you can come before the court and say, you know what Malcolm Shaw says? He says, South Africa didn't give us a chance to sit down and negotiate, and maybe we could have come to an agreement on this. Like we're talking about alimony.
It was mass murder, we've agreed, but not genocide. Halfway.
Right.
Sorry, go ahead.
No,
the write-up in the Intercept makes the point that it summarizes the way you did, and then makes the point that after South Africa publicly accused Israel of genocide in November and called for the ICC to issue a warrant for Netanyahu's arrest, Israel responded by withdrawing its ambassador to South Africa, which somewhat undermines the idea that it was.
Do you think there's a genocide happening? I think it would be a crime against all the history of the world if the ICJ were to seriously say that. I don't think there's a genocide happening. No, I think that's a ridiculous assertion. I think that Israel-Palestine has presented a lot of unique challenges for law of armed conflict analyses, but a genocide clearly is not. I just don't think. It just seems like a ridiculous. But maybe once I read the South African claims, maybe I'll feel differently about it, but probably not. But like, remember, we're talking about a very special intent. What was it? Dolus specialis, I think is the term in Latin or whatever, is an incredibly special intent that makes genocide a crime. It's not killing, it's like literally like our goal is to wipe this particular group of people from existence. It's not just we want to kill, it's not just we want to kill a ton of civilians, we want to kill these guys so they're never probably going to kill so many civilians and families, we fucking hate them, blah, blah, blah. It's like, it is a very, very, very special intentioned crime. Which is why I think if that that one guy, but like, oh God. So let me try to navigate this. Fuck, I wish I had that guy with me still. I need him on retainer. I think you could possibly wind up in a world where two things can happen, okay? There's two things that can happen, three things that can happen. One is no genocide is being, I think we can say it's possible that no genocide is happening. However, two other things could be happening. I think Israel, and this might actually be possible. I could entertain this actually, just based on quotes I've seen though, okay? Israel could be guilty of failing to uphold their side of the Convention Against Genocide by allowing statements of people in Israel to be made who are representatives of the government who are making genocidal statements. That could be one thing. So even with no genocide happening, that could be one thing. And then as part of the Rome Statute, for Article 7, which deals with genocide, there could be charges for people in Israel that are making genocidal statements, I believe, or encouraging genocide. So those two things could be true without a genocide happening. And I could see maybe those two things as being possibilities, if that makes sense. Whew, okay. This is like, so very, very, very particular. So if we were to look at, I need to throw the Genocide Convention on here. I need to switch these two things around too. But if we were to look at the, so for instance, I think under, no, it's Article 6. Don't let me forget this. It's Article 6, okay? For the purpose of the statute, genocide means any of the following acts committed with intent to destroy in whole or in part. Wait. Were statements not a part of this? Hold on. Wait, maybe statements weren't a part. I might have made that part up. Hold on. This is why I always check after I say something, just to make sure. Genocide. Elements of crimes. So we've got 6A, 6B, 6C. I thought one of the... Oh, no, fuck. Forget everything I just said. Or forget half of what I just said. I'm sorry. The ICC might be able to get somebody for a crime against humanity, I think. But it wouldn't necessarily be... It wouldn't be Article 6 genocide. That's why I was thinking Article 7, because it might be crimes against humanity, but it wouldn't be the crime of genocide. Please tell me an international law person just joined.
No, I joined.
Loner box. Oh,
but,
okay. Well, what's up?
Yeah, incitement is part of it. It's just that you're reading the different thing. It's the Genocide Convention.
Sure, which isn't part of the ICC.
The
yeah.
genocide thing. Yeah.
Wait.
Article 2 is the act, and then 3 is the other one.
Yeah. Hold on real quick. Israel is not a signatory to the ICC anymore. Rome Statute stuff is not irrelevant. Didn't Palestine sign on to the ICC? Because if they did, then Palestine can launch a case and then try to arrest Israeli leaders. And then two other countries that are part of the ICC, I think, can also request a case or investigation into violations of that. You don't have to be a signatory to the ICC to be accused of crimes or charged of crimes. You just wouldn't like turn your own people over, but I think people in other countries could. Yeah, okay. For the Prevention of Genocide Convention, Prevention, Genocide Convention, I think encouraging or allowing statements to be made, I think is considered contravention. So Article 3, wait, you said it was under Article 2 or?
No, Article 3.
Article 3. The following acts shall be punishable: genocide, conspiracy to commit genocide, direct and public incitement to commit genocide. So it would be Article 3, subsection C. And I think you have an obligation to not have these things being stated in your country, right?
This was the ICJ saying that to Israel. They were I think one of their requests was something about punishing people who incite genocide. And that's why, I wonder if that's why Ben-Gvir got very mad about it.
What did he, yeah, I have to look up the quotes of these people because like sometimes, Finkelstein himself has cited some quotes, and then when I go to look them up, he's not actually talking about all Palestinians. He's talking about Hamas, which I think is meaningfully different. I'm not saying that he's never made those statements. I'm just saying that sometimes when I look them up, they're not, like the quotes are always a little bit clip-chimped. What do you think are some of the worst ones?
I can't remember the Ben-Gvir one exactly, but Ben-Gvir and Smotrich have definitely not made distinctions between Hamas and the rest of the Palestinians. As for people in the war cabinet, who are a bit more important, I guess, for the direct thing, I think the ICJ said when they highlighted plausible quotes for incitement, it was that Yoav Gallant one about the human animals.
Sure.
But even that one is preceded by a paragraph where he mentions Hamas. So
sure, okay.
But yeah, like I noticed I only read part of that ICJ thing from South Africa, the 84-page one.
Yeah.
I went through a bunch of the quotes, and it's the way that they cite every quote is for each single one, they omit the part where they mention Hamas. Okay. It's very selective. And their footnotes are mostly UN. I noticed 2 of their footnotes came from Quds News Network, from the Twitter account.
Interesting.
Which, and one is just a video. It's like
Al-Quds is, that's a Palestinian news? Al-Quds?
Quds News Network is like the Hamas. I don't know if they're affiliated, but they're like pro-Hamas. Yeah, like their fucking Twitter banner is like it's called Operation Al-Aqsa Flood Live Coverage, their banner on Twitter.
Gotcha, Jesus
and
Christ.
That's in 2 of the footnotes from the South Africa case.
Operation Al-Aqsa Flood is the basically the Palestinian or Arab nickname for the October 7th. Yeah, okay. Fuck, I closed the South African opinion. Why did I do this? .pdf. I'm probably going to read through that entire opinion tonight, but wait, what are you doing? How late are you going to be up? What's up?
I'll probably be up for a while. I was just watching you and taking notes in the background on different stuff.
Okay. Fuck. Can somebody read the can somebody relink me the South African opinion? I don't know how I closed it.
I have it.
Okay, yeah. Also, I believe that for the ICJ case, I haven't read through this yet, so I'm going by what my international law guy told me, that there's not, I don't think South Africa was asking the ICJ to even consider like that Israel is committing a genocide or anything, but they just want the first part of like a genocide is taking place. I think that was like thank you, I have this now. That's the thing they're considering as well, or that's what they asked them to consider essentially, but yeah, I don't know. I'll read it. Okay, I want to keep watching this. Or go ahead.
Yeah, no, that's fine. Take care.
Wait. Do I? No. Okay. Love you. Be careful. Bye.
Bye.
Okay. Hello?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. One of the quotes that pops up a lot in the Ben-Ami book is that Israel sometimes wants peace but is unwilling to pay the price, and only once they've been willing to pay the price were they able to get peace. What was the price for peace that Israel paid for Jordan?
I don't know.
Fuck you.
Couldn't tell you.
For Syria, they were willing to give back the Golan Heights, and then that fell through for dumb reasons. For Egypt, they gave back the Sinai, but I don't actually know what was given up for.
Given up. So
like, were any concessions made, or was it just like a normalization of relations and that's it? Or
I feel like it's different with Jordan. I think I'm just riffing a little bit, but like in 48, even then, Israel and Jordan were like a little bit less antagonistic than Israel was with the rest of the Arab states.
Wait,
because
hold on.
King Abdullah.
Fuck. The package room is locked? What? No, I was talking to him. They said the package room is locked?
The package room is locked. Like, there's no one there to open the door.
What does it mean when it says left outside on porch?
I don't know. Is it for sure coming to this address? You can give it the right. You can target another address by accident, maybe?
Nope. I deleted all the other ones off my account. Yeah, well, I can check the package in the morning, I guess, but okay. Be careful. Yeah. Okay, sorry. I'm sorry. Yeah.
9:30.
Okay, sorry, go again.
So, Jordan, you know how Jordan has like I think this actually came from 94. You know how Jordan has like a weird, like a custodianship over the holy sites in Jerusalem?
I didn't know that. Did they give that up in 94?
I think that came in 94, yeah. And I think the rest of it would have been to do with, they used to have fucking disputes over, there's a fucking river somewhere in the West Bank. I think there was something over that as well. But it's nothing like huge, but I know Hashemite like custodianship is like was a thing. The Jordanians have custodianship over the Temple Mount and like different holy sites in Jerusalem. I don't know how that important that was to Israel to give up, but I don't know.
Also, I'm gonna be totally fucking honest, because I hadn't dived into the area delineations of like area A, B, and C. For some reason, I just assumed for a long time like area C was like a little bit of stuff near the Green Line, and then some of like the area outside of East Jerusalem. I didn't know area C was like fucking 60% of the West Bank.
Yeah, area C is
what
fucking huge.
What the fuck? Bro,
it's
what?
It isn't that
Holy
many.
shit!
The majority of the Arabs in the West Bank live in areas A and B, like 70+% or something.
Sure,
yeah.
but still,
Area C is big.
God damn. I think I'd like glanced at this map before, and I like assumed that it was like stuff in the black line over here, basically, and then like the red stuff. I was like, okay, area C. I never actually looked at the legend or thought much about it, I guess. But I guess it makes sense based on the Trump peace plan maps and everything. But like, god damn, yeah, not cool.
There's also an argument. I don't know if you know about Oslo, about the idea that although there was a lot of optimism from it at the beginning, the deployments of Israel out of areas A and B basically resulted in a kind of like segregation system coming up that hadn't actually existed as much there before. So for some people, life actually got quite a bit harder after 93, with just like movement, especially between East Jerusalem and the rest of the West Bank. There used to be like a lot of freedom of movement for Palestinians, and the West Bank was kind of like restricted after that.
Damn. Rip. Okay.
Was that
what?
Was that all, or do you want more?
No, I was just curious about the Jordan thing. I could have looked it up, but I just like talking to you, you know? Okay.
That's so sweet. Okay. Take care.
Love you. Bye.
Bye.
He had to deal with was the question, which is the core issue. Is there an intent to commit genocide? And the Israeli delegation handed over to him that second issue. So the big jurisdictional issue was Malcolm Shaw, and then the big substantive issue of genocide. And basically what Shaw argues is this. He says, Israel's only aim is to get the hostages back and to dismantle Hamas. He then says, step two, all those statements that we all now know by Netanyahu and Amalek, by the defense minister, and no food, water, electricity, and fuel, all those statements, he dismisses them as, quote, a few random statements. And he says what we have to look at is the operational orders by the Ministry of Security Affairs and by the War Cabinet. You have to look at the orders, and all the orders are very proper. You have to obey international humanitarian law. You have to be proportional.
Who's typing? Why do they keep doing this?
War Cabinet. You have to look at the orders, and all the orders are very proper.
Oh, it's Rabbani. He's over here shit posting. I see that. He's got the shit poster's face. You can see him typing and shit. He's tweeting right now.
Ministry of Security Affairs.
But he's hiding it.
War Cabinet. You have to look at the orders, and all the orders are very proper.
Oh, never mind. I think it's actually Briahna. Fuck.
International humanitarian law. You have to be proportionate. You can't target civilians. All the orders are very proper. And then the next step in his argument is to say that's exactly what Israel's been doing. It's been absolutely faithful to the principles of proportionality, what's called distinction and discrimination. And then he says that they've also been very cooperative on the issue of bringing in humanitarian relief. Whereas what's the South African argument? The South African argument is, let's look at those few random statements. They're genocidal. Let's look at the actual practice on the ground. And then come the hundreds of citations that Israel is not being proportionate, it's not being discriminate, it's not proportionate, and it's targeting civilians. And they say that what's actually happening on the ground coheres with the statements, those few random statements. They're committing genocide. And then the last part is to say the humanitarian relief is trivial next to what needs to be done. And so
is there no pushback on this show? No. But it's still good just to hear them both functioning as a unit. See what they're like.
The Israeli case completely falls apart when you look at what's actually happening. And look at what's actually happening. They're not targeting Hamas. That's not true. Now, you might say I'm exaggerating here when I say they're not targeting Hamas. In fact, they're not. It's just hit or miss. When you are bombing indiscriminately, when you are carpet.
This is like, I have to think about this a lot. I'll spend a lot of time thinking about it. This statement is just so obviously not true that given what, 20, 30, 40, 50%, depending on whose numbers you're taking, of people killed or militants, that's indiscriminate carpet bombing. It just is obvious. It's so obviously not true in its face. And that Israel does more than literally any other country in the world to try to avoid civilian casualties. Nobody else in the world takes all of these same fucking steps that Israel does to try to prevent civilian casualties. Like, what is the compulsion on Israel here to avoid civilian casualties at some point? Obviously, you still have to adhere to your principle of distinction, everything. Or I'm sorry, your obviously distinction, but your proportionality. But like, nah, it's like, I think it's.
In fact, they're not. It's just hit or miss. When you are bombing indiscriminately, when you are carpet bombing, you're hoping one of your bombs will drop on a tunnel, but you're not actually targeting the tunnel. That's what it means to bomb indiscriminately. You're not targeting anything. So I will, of course, acknowledge they want to dismantle Hamas or defeat it or destroy it. I have no doubt about that. But their modus operandi, how they're going about doing it, is by simply indiscriminately bombing everything, flattening everything, and then in the northern sector, after you've flattened everything, almost literally, there are many towns which are gone, like Beit Lahia, Beit Hanun, apparently, there's nothing there anymore. And then they come in for the ground operation, they allegedly are looking for the tunnels. But that's not what they're doing. That's why, from the beginning, Israel won the propaganda war from day one, when it was described as Israel-Hamas war. That was the terminology that was immediately adopted by everyone. That's not true. It's an Israel-Gaza war. They are targeting the civilian population. And as a afterthought...
Where do they get this from? It literally just comes from the number of people dead. They'll just say 29,000, 29,000, 29,000. That's it. Like, that's it.
Happened to get Hamas, this carpet bombing, terrific. But that's not what was happening. Hamas.
John Feiner, just really quickly, then Mouin, take it away, but John Feiner, National Security Advisor John Feiner, during one of his appearances on the Sunday morning shows this weekend, said something about how Israel is beginning the shift to targeting more high-value Hamas targets, which, as Aaron pointed out, was kind of a confession that up until now they haven't been targeting them. They're just starting to. It's just been wholesale mass slaughter up until now.
What?
Yeah, I think, in fact, in my view, that was the strongest part of the South African presentation, because genocide is primarily or crucially about intent. In theory, Israel can kill as many people as it wants, but unless it can be demonstrated that there was genocidal intent to those actions, it can't be guilty of genocide. And for the South African legal team, first, Abida Hassim, I thought, made a very powerful presentation showing the genocidal nature of Israel's campaign. And then Tembeka Ngukaito did, I thought, the crucial presentation on...
I'm going to get killed on my pronunciation. I'm just going to go over pronunciation with Benny for like an hour. Like, hey, dog, how do you say these?
Intent, where he just overwhelmed us with statement after statement after statement from Israeli leaders, from decision makers, prominent members of civil society, journalists, all the rest of it. And even more importantly, then drew a very persuasive link of how these statements were translated into action on the ground by the foot soldiers.
This guy literally has pronunciation glasses. He puts on glasses just to pronounce things correct. Holy shit.
By the way, do you guys want to hear, this is a little behind the scenes, but someone who's been on my show and Bree show, and in fact I should do another show with all of us together, but it's Craig McIver, the UN human rights lawyer who resigned from the UN, and he texted me a message. Can I share it? It's about a point of departure that he has. Let's see. And I got permission. I just thought it's an interesting response. Okay. So he says, excellent show with Bree, Norman, Mouin, but I disagree somewhat with their analysis of the self-defense question. This is not Ukraine, Russia, or internal assaults within a state, Myanmar. This is occupied territory, and the ICJ has already ruled in the Wall case that Israel, as the occupying power, does not have an Art 51 right to self-defense in the territories it occupies. In other words, they can defend themselves in generic terms, but they have no right to make war on Gaza in the name of self-defense. Second, the kinds of acts it is carrying out in Gaza are unlawful, even where self-defense is recognized. Third, if there is a plausible case of genocide, self-defense is no excuse. Finally, a ceasefire would not render Israel defenseless, as they could still repel any attacks. I don't know what the court will rule. Bias is a factor, and they might fall for Israel's arguments. But
Article 51, you don't have an Article 51 right to self-defense in an occupied territory. Is that true? Occupied territory, Article 51, self-defense. Oh, what is this? The right to self-defense in both international and criminal law context refers to the justified use of force to repel an attack or imminent threat against oneself, others, or legally protected interest. Under international law, the notion of self-defense can be traced in two different institutions, i.e. Use ad bellum, international law regulating the resort to force, and use in bello, international law regulating behavior in war. Article 2, subsection 4 of the UN Charter strictly prohibits states from using force that threatens the territorial integrity or political independence of any nation, except in cases of individual or collective self-defense, as stated in Article 51. Article 51 of the Charter states, nothing in the present Charter shall impair the inherent right of individual or collective self-defense individual or collective self-defense. If an armed attack occurs against a member of the United Nations, so the Security Council is taking measures necessary to maintain international peace and security. Is that all of Article 51? Action with respect to threats to the peace, breaches of the peace, and acts of aggression. This is the Charter of the United Nations, which every country that's part of the UN, I believe, should be bound to, right? Okay.
The self-defense claim of Israel is not as clear as Norman and Mouin have suggested tonight. But great discussion. I love both of them, and you and Bree too.
Well, he's of course entirely correct on Article 51, and that's already been ruled on, as he points out, in 2004 by the ICJ in its advisory opinion of the law, where it basically said the right of self-defense under Article 51 only exists in relation to other states and not to a territory it occupies. But I do think that while he's legally correct, I do think...
Would that be true? If the Kurds... Has Turkey ever been in front of the ICJ for their treatment of Kurdish people in terms of rights of self-defense? Turkey, Article 51, self-defense, PKK. Oh my God. Can we find an exact? No shot. Self-defense can speak PKK, the Turkish approach to international law. The conflict between Turkey and the Kurdistan Workers' Party is a Kurdish insurgent movement. It's a 4-decade-long guerrilla war in the southeast region of the country. Turkish Erdogan, in a reaction to an attack, which killed 28 people and another 61 injured. So whenever it's right to self-defense, it's all kinds of terror threats. Self-defense in the ICJ's jurisprudence. As a matter of international law, a victim of an armed attack can only exercise its right to self-defense under the conditions foreseen by Article 51 of the UN Charter. From the wording of Article 51 of the UN Charter, if an armed attack occurs against a member of the United Nations, it seems clear that only states are designated as the targets of armed attack, and the Charter remains silent on the issue of the origin of the armed attack. However, the International Court of Justice removed the doubt over the issue in the Wall case. Is this with related to Israel? Well, what is it called? Where it provided that Article 51 of the Charter thus recognizes the existence of an inherent right of self-defense in the case of armed attack by one state against another state. Therefore, there is in practice no space for an interpretation, accepting that armed non-state actors could be perpetrators of an act permitting the exercise of the right of self-defense. Accordingly, the ICJ's jurisprudence is based on the rejection of self-defense against armed non-state actors. Is that true? So if ISIS were to attack you from another country, you wouldn't have a jus ad bellum, you wouldn't have a cause, you wouldn't have a just reason for attacking. Let's see, wall case ICJ. Is this the West Bank wall construction? For the wall case? What kind of legal document is this? Normally they provide so much information about the case they're citing. You're missing a great stream with 3 of your best friends. Oh, wall case. Thank you. Legal consequence of the construction of a wall in the occupied... Okay, state. In-studio debate. Oh, Farah and Jasmine told me they were going to debate this guy, and I told them to be careful because he's a fucking clown. Good luck. Self-defense against PKK. Nevertheless, there are many different interpretations of the ICJ's jurisprudence. Hence, we can see the development of a state practice of exercising the right of self-defense against non-state actors as a result of increasing violent actions of such actors. As Jeremy Wright argues, many states now hold the view and have acted on the basis that the inherent right of self-defense extends to the use of force against armed groups and includes the right to use force in response to both an actual and an imminent armed attack by that non-state actor. Currently, states are frequently confronted with attacks by armed non-state actors which use other states' territories to carry out these attacks in such conditions. The use of military force in self-defense against these groups by extending Article 51 of the UN Charter to non-state actors has become a matter of controversy. To be clear, using self-defense measures against armed non-state actors has changed the international community's understanding of self-defense in international law. As Anna Peters states, the silence of the vast majority of states is in normative terms problematic because it risks being interpreted as implied acquiescence to an extensive interpretation of Article 51 of the... the silence is probably intentional. If we think about what a state is, and if we think about what a state would want to do, I imagine most states would probably want to have an Article 51 right of self-defense against non-state actors. I would be shocked if states spoke out against that, right? Likewise, the state directly affected by a use of force justified by an extensive interpretation of Article 51 will be likely to protest explicitly. Moreover, as Judge Sima pointed out in the Congo case, a restrictive reading of Article 51 might well have reflected the state, or rather the prevailing interpretation of the international law substance for a long time. However, in the light of the more recent developments, not only in state practice, but also with regard to accompanying opinio juris, it ought urgently to be reconsidered also by the court. This topic seems pretty hotly debated. I mean, if your state hosts a lot of non-state actors that do terrorist attacks, I could see people being upset about it. Oh, the Lieber Institute is an article. I have to be careful not to keep sprawling on articles. I'm like a developer with no manager. I keep adding shit to read. I need to tighten up my arguments and everything. I need to set an end date for like reading stuff. Maybe tomorrow night, or Israel Hamas 2023 Symposium. Israel's right to self-defense against Hamas. Oh, is it the same author? I read a lot from this author. Oh no, it's a different author. I read a lot from this website though. I don't want to get too biased because I'm only taking, this seems like a good website though. They make a lot of citations to international law and everything, which I appreciate. Instead of like, God, Amnesty International's citations or references to international law are off the wall. Sometimes they seem to be pretty spot on. Other times they seem to be atrocious. I just can't tell all the time for the Amnesty International stuff and for some UN docs as well. It's not Schmidt. Yeah. Okay. The Wall case. You said the Wall case in what pages? Legal consequence. Wait, or what page? Paragraphs 138 to 141. Curious how narrow or broad the ruling was. The court has thus concluded that the construction of the wall constitutes action not in conformity with various international legal obligations incumbent upon Israel. However, Annex 1 to the report of the Secretary General states that according to Israel, the construction of the barrier is consistent with Article 51 of the Charter of the United Nations, its inherent right to self-defense, and Security Council Resolution 1368 and 1373. More specifically, Israel's permanent representative to the United Nations asserted in the General Assembly on the 20th of October 2003 that the fence is a measure wholly consistent with the right of states to self-defense enshrined in Article 51 of the Charter. The Security Council resolutions referred to, he continued, have clearly recognized the right of states to use force and self-defense against terrorist attacks, and therefore surely recognize the right to use non-forcible measures to that end under the terms of Article 51 of the Charter of the United Nations. Article 51 thus recognizes the existence of an inherent right of self-defense in the case of armed attack by one state against another state. Nothing in the present charter shall impair the inherent right of individual or collective self-defense if an armed attack occurs against a member of the United Nations until the Security Council has taken measures necessary to maintain international peace and security. Article 51 of the Charter thus recognizes the existence of an inherent right of self-defense in the case of armed attack by one state against another state. That's not true. That's not the language here. I feel like an argument needs to be made about that. However, Israel does not claim that the attacks against it are imputable to a foreign state. The court also notes that Israel exercises control in the occupied Palestinian territory and that, as Israel itself states, the threat which it regards as justifying the construction of the wall originates within and not outside that territory. The situation is thus different from the contemplated by Security Council resolutions 1368 and 1373, and therefore Israel could not in any event invoke those resolutions in support of its claim to be exercising the right of self-defense. SC 1368. SC 1368. Let's see. Summary. Unequivocally condemns in the strongest terms of horrifying terrorist actions which took place on September 11th. Like in any act of international terrorism is a threat to international peace and security, expresses deepest sympathies, calls on all states to work together urgently to bring to justice the perpetrators, organizers, and sponsors of these terrorist attacks, and stresses that those responsible for aiding, supporting, or harboring the perpetrators calls on the international community to redouble their efforts to prevent and suppress terrorist acts, including by increased cooperation and full implementation of the relevant international anti-terrorist conventions and Security Council resolutions, expresses its readiness to take all necessary steps to respond to the terrorist attack, all forms of terrorism. And then we've got SC 1373. SC 1373. What? Abortion? No, Security Council. Oh, this is going to be another... let's see. This is a Security Council resolution adopted by the Security Council, reaffirming resolutions bullshit, reaffirming its unequivocal condemnation, reaffirming, deeply concerned by the increase in various regions of the world, calling on states to work together to urgently to prevent and suppress terrorist attacks or terrorist acts, recognizing the need for states to complement international cooperation by taking additional measures to understand, reaffirming the principle established by the General Assembly Declaration of October 70. It's the duty to refrain from organizing, instigating, assisting, or participating in terrorist acts, acting under 6 shall prevent and suppress the financing of terrorist acts, criminalize the willful provision or collection by any means directly or indirectly of funds by their nationals or in their territories with the intention that the funds should be used, freeze without delay funds and other financial assets, prohibit their nationals within their territories from making any funds, financial assets, or economic resources or financial other. I feel like you could use some of the Security Council resolution for fighting Hamas even in your own state. Decides, right, binding language, decides that all states shall refrain from providing any form of support, active or passive, take the necessary steps to prevent the commission of terrorist acts, including by provision of early warning to other states by exchange of information, deny safe haven, prevent those who finance, plan, facilitate, or commit terrorist acts from using their respective territories for those purposes, ensure that any person who participates in the afford one another the greatest measure of assistance in connecting, prevent the movement of terrorists or terrorist groups by effective border controls and controls on issuance of identity papers and travel documents, calls upon states to find... I mean, this would mean that the U.S. wouldn't be able to retaliate against Al-Qaeda at all, right? Wait, what do you mean? Why not? What? Article 51 of the Charter thus recognizes an inherent right of self-defense in the case of armed attack by one state against another state. However, Israel does not claim... This does not say that. I really don't like this language. The court also notes that Israel exercises controlling act by terror and that as Israel suffers the threat which it just... The situation is thus different from the contemplated by... and therefore Israel could not in any event invoke those resolutions in support of its claim to be exercising right of self-defense. Aren't they arguing there's no self-defense against non-state actors? It's arguing, first it argues that, then it says, well, even if it is a non-state actor, since it's from within their own territories, they can't do anything about it. But I don't believe that. SC 1368, the first one, maybe not, but I feel like SC 1373, I think there's a reading of that, unless there's like an application, unless we've got like precedent where they're not applied in such a way, or I don't know, that... Consequently, the court concludes that Article 51 of the Charter has no relevance in this case. Like, some of the, okay, and again, low conviction rates here, okay? Low conviction rates, right? Because I'm not like an international legal expert. But when I read legal stuff, legal analyses in like US courts, the writing is sophisticated. The writing is done well, the sourcing is done well, the arguments are there. I feel like sometimes I read UN stuff and they just like say things and they're like, oh, well, this isn't like that. And then it's like done. And it's like, wait, well, why not? What do you mean? Like, this is not, like, so this on its face is not true. Article 51 of the Charter thus recognizes the existence of an inherent right of self-defense in the case of armed attack by one state against another state. Article 51 of the Charter doesn't say that. If you want to make that argument, you need to put forth that argument. Like say like, oh, well, historically, this is how Article 51 has been applied. Here's how it hasn't been applied. In these cases, it's worked. In these cases, it hasn't. This statement is, this is the same fucking advisory opinion that gets thrown at me that says that the wall construction was illegal, isn't it? Advisory opinion, it is. This is the one that always gets thrown out there. I wonder if the analysis of the wall being built is also dog shit from a legal perspective. Oof, I don't have the time to go into this. I don't have the time. Wait, Article 51 UN Charter recognizes the right to self-defense as it states that Article 2, subsection 4, prohibition of the use of force shall not impair the inherent right to self-defense against an armed attack from another state. It does say that. Wait, does it say that in another part? Fuck. Wait, where are you getting that at? Hold on. You said Article 51 in Article 2, subsection 4? Or what is... The organization and its members in pursuit of the purposes stated in Article 1 shall act in accordance with the following principles. Article 2, Section 4. All members shall refrain in their international relations from the threat or use of force against the territorial integrity or political independence of any state or in any other manner inconsistent. Wait, I don't know where you're getting this from. Azure Cloud. By who is that PDF? If it's wrong, well, that was the advisory opinion that I think the ICJ. Wait, Azure Cloud, where are you linking this from? Where are you getting this from? It says nothing in the charter shall impair the right of self-defense, including Article 2, 4, which prohibits use of force. What? I don't know what you say. Take a minute and type out a whole sentence. I don't know what you're saying. Okay, what was the rest of that? Fuck. Article. Wait, what the fuck were we even reading? We came all the way from Turkish shit. The exception only applies until the UN Security Council takes the necessary measures to maintain international peace and security. Both the prohibition of unilateral use of force and the self-defense exception are recognized as fundamental principles of customary international law of the highest legal standing called jus cogens. Thus, the concept of self-defense in international law is a multifaceted and integrated subject. The primary objective of self-defense, as per Article 51, is to halt and repel an armed attack, including the possibility of expelling the aggressor if they have invaded the victim state territory. However, complexities arising when the attack is ceased, and the victim state seeks to defend itself against potential future threats in such situations. The use of force can have preventative, punitive, deterrent, or combined purposes, leading to varied justifications and implications. Distinguishing between armed reprisals and legitimate self-defense actions involves several critical factors. One significant element is the absence of an armed attack, which might not meet the threshold required for a legitimate act of self-defense. Righteous self-defense or different theories. One theory known as the halting repelling theory suggests the use of what's limited to stopping repelling. Another theory, the trigger theory, argues that once an attack has occurred, the victim state defend itself against the aggressor. The future attack theory suggests, okay. However, the question of whether self-defense is justified stems from an armed group rather than another state, and whether the attack must materialize to legally invoke self-defense remains a complex issue under debate. And the recent conflict between Israel and Hamas, firstly, it is imperative to understand the geopolitical dynamic between two entities. Critical consideration lies in the fact that the state Israel cannot maintain control over the territory of Western Bank, Gaza. It occupies all simultaneous military attacks because the occupied territory is foreign and poses an external national security threat. So can the right to self-defense be exercised by the occupant wherein it is already using police force to maintain law and order under international law and community? The West Bank Gaza Strip have been duly recognized as militarily occupied territories since 1967. Israel's commitment is the right to protect itself and its citizens from attacks by Palestine within the territories. However, Israel also has responsibility to maintain law and order, ensuring the security and well-being of like Regulation 43 law, legal framework allows for the use of force for law enforcement. Distinguish the right of self-defense from the right of police, both of which are government laws, armed conflict. Under international law, once the conflict takes place, jus ad bellum presides over it. Following the regulations concerning the laws, when an occupation is already in place, Western Bank Gaza Strip, the occupying state Israel cannot use militarized force in response to an armed attack. It can only use police force to restore order. The context of Israel's right to self-defense argued upon the importance of differentiating between self-defense and defense, and asserted that the ambit of self-defense is narrow and should not be confused with general notions of defense. If Israel's claim the right to self-defense is taken invalid under international law, then it would lead to the legitimacy of the authority of the occupant state Israel to use its military along with the police over the occupant territory. Thus, it is unclear how Israel as an occupant can claim the right of self-defense when it has been controlling, policing, and making settlements in the occupied Palestinian territory since 1967. This is why another reason why the unilateral withdrawal from Gaza and whether or not Israel views itself as an occupying force in Gaza or not might be relevant here. Destiny, he got back to you. What? Destiny, Article 2.4 of the UN Charter generally prohibits the use of force by states or the threat of it against others and their relationships. However, Article 51 UN Charter makes an exception to this general prohibition. In respects of self-defense in the case where another state attacks a state or for where the UN Security Council calls for the use of force, as per Article 51 UN Charter, states making self-defense also need to report it to the UN Security Council. What is Article 2 subsection 4 whatever? I just don't know what that is. So Article 2.4 of the UN Charter. Was I at the right place before? Prohibits the threat or use of force and calls on all members to respect the sovereignty, territorial integrity, and political independence of other states. Oh, I understand. Never mind. So this is a prohibition. So you can't just like go blow people up, basically. That's what this is. You can't go blow people up. And then Article 51 provides an exception for that. I understand the argument now. Scribble, thanks for the tier 5 sub, buddy. So Article 2 says, yeah, don't go blow up random people. Article 51 says nothing in the present charter. Wait. Article 2 prohibits the threat or use of force and calls on all members to respect the sovereignty, territorial integrity, and political independence of other states. The case studies in this section typically covers instances where Article 2.4 was cited and discussed in the context of inter- or intrastate violence war in other territories. And then nothing in the present charter shall impair the inherent right or individual or collective self-defense if an armed attack occurs against a member of the United Nations until the Security Council has taken measures. Okay. So the legal question would be if Article 51 directly counters or directly addresses Article 2, Section 4, basically. Gotcha. So I understand this is probably, a lot of people in chat are saying this is like a hotly contested area of international law. Self-defense on behalf of non-state actors. Interesting. That's under the UN Charter. What year was this published? Oh my God. 2022. Okay. Curious what the conclusion is. It's only a 39-page paper, but when the UN was chartered, non-state actors weren't as much a thing as they are now. Sure. Just over 75 years ago, the world came together and inked the most fundamental international rule of all, the prohibition on the use of military force for anything but self-defense. That self-defense exception, codified at Article 51 of the UN Charter, was extremely narrow by design, but over the years, and especially since September 11th, the scope of this exception, originally conceived as applying to states only, has morphed beyond recognition to include non-state actors, largely overlooked the emergence of self-defense on behalf of non-state partners in Syria. It's a novel twist that threatens the existence of the global system by reducing its most fundamental rule to a technical speed bump. Two factors explain why this recent doctrinal expansion has evaded meaningful attention, much less resistance, despite the outsized consequences. For one, it is subtle. Non-state actors like Al-Qaeda, especially in a post-9/11 world, already appear to be legitimate targets of force under international law. What is one more twist in seeking to make them legitimate beneficiaries of defense? What is one more twist? Second, the latest expansion of self-defense has the luxury of political expedience. Both liberal internationalists repulsed by Syria's Assad regime and neoconservative realists in favor of America's military supremacy had no particular reason to be more vocal against the unlawful expansion of self-defense. Oh wait, this paper seems like it's talking about expanding Article 51 for self-defense to non-state actors. This is Article 51, right to self-defense for non-state actors. No. The 2017 shoot-down of a Syrian plane by the U.S. is a clear violation of international law. The legal justification provided self-defense of the SDF has no basis on... Wait, 2017 shoot-down of a Syrian plane. Clear violation of international law. Wasn't that a mistake? Was that... Am I thinking of... I know that there was a civilian plane shot down south of Tehran from Iran. Did we shoot down a Syrian civilian plane? I'm trying to remember. Syrian civilian plane shot down 2017. I don't remember. Fuck me. Su-22 was shot down by the U.S. Navy after it dropped bombs near U.S.-led coalition partner SDF fighters. The pilot initially fired a Sidewinder, which broke around a Syrian jet. Oh, no, wait. It wasn't even a civilian plane. Oh, the shoot down of a Syrian plane by the U.S. is a clear violation of international law. Okay, that might be true. The legal justification provided, self-defense of the SDF, oh, I see, has no basis in Article 51 jurisprudence. The SDF is a non-state actor, has no right to self-defense that could provide the legal base. Okay, this paper only has to do with invoking Article 51 of non-state actors, not against non-state actors, I guess, right?
With your attitudes, I know that a lot of people will be willing to kill you. Is that fair?
Pardon me?
With your attitudes, I think there will be a lot of people willing to kill you. Do you think that's fair?
Oh, sure. I'm in for a good fight. I am in for a good fight. That's fine. But we practice. You better start practicing now if you think you're going to kill me.
You want to kill everybody. Are you proud of that?
I didn't say everybody.
Race?
I didn't say I wanted to kill everybody.
You think
I have enemy identification.
When 6 million Jews got killed,
Is this guy, this is, if they have the little hat thing on, this is like always Jewish stuff, right? Do secular Jews wear the little hat, or is that only religious Jews?
Good. 6 million lives!
Holocaust? I'm a revisionist.
The what did he say?
Jews got killed. You thought that was good.
Did he say the hoaxacost?
6 million lives!
Holocaust? I'm a revisionist. The Holocaust, not a Holocaust. The Holocaust is yet to come.
Okay.
Holy
So what you're
shit.
saying, excuse me, you're saying that my
Hello?
Hey, who joined?
Oh, hey, it's Cheetah. Are you live right now? Didn't see you were live.
Almost always. I try to be live from 1 to 9. What's up?
Oh, shit, I'm sorry. Don't worry about it. I'll just send you a message. Have a good stream.
Wait, well, now we all want to know. What was it?
Don't worry. I'll shoot you a message.
Okay.
Have a good stream, bro.
Excuse me.
Is this like Jewish Jerry Springer? What do we watch? What the fuck is this program?
So what you're saying, excuse me, you're saying that excuse me, are you
Or wait,
saying
is this just American Jerry Springer? I'm sorry. This is a very young Jerry Springer. My bad.
my grandparents and my uncles and aunts were not killed in the Holocaust? Could you help me find them, please, sir? When the show is over, could you come with me and help find them then? Because I happen to
come with you and help find them.
Okay,
they went up in smoke.
Are they hiding out? Did 6 million people suddenly ride away and hide out in the back of some McDonald's? What do you think happened to them, sir? 6 million human beings got killed, got gassed.
How come the numbers don't jive? How come the number of the Jews before and
What does this little thing kefaya? What the is that even what this is? Is this always like a Muslim, or is it an Arabic thing, or is it just a fucking scarf, or does this mean anything ever, or?
after the war don't jive?
That's
How come
a
there were
bandana.
more Jews after the war than before the war? If 6 million were killed.
Thankfully, some of us love. We don't just die.
Well, where do you meet up with? Where do you meet up with myself and my Palestinian cousins after?
Nobody
we'll see what
claims you-
happens.
Trust
We're
me,
going to be
sir.
fighting
Man.
side by side.
The kefaya is a symbol of Palestinian resistance. Yeah, is that what he was wearing? I don't remember. Okay. Maybe not. Okay, don't care. Fuck, we're clicking way too much. That UN advisory opinion was such dog shit. Who wrote that? I'm so curious. Who wrote that goddamn opinion? Because that gets thrown at me all the time too. UN 2004 advisory opinion West Bank. If it's by the ICJ, it should have had like some real ass people writing it, right? Can I see? But the Goldstone report had like, well, did it actually? No, those were like human rights people, right? Goldstone himself was like a decent judge, though. No? Oh fuck, I'm getting too sidetracked down out of this. Dispute between. Okay. Are you starting to understand why Israel doesn't trust the UN? I think all the stuff relating to the UN RWA shit recently is really bad. I'll dig up all that tomorrow and then we'll definitely bring that up. Okay, sorry, let's try to finish this.
First of all, that the judges, or a majority of them, are probably going...
Let's go back.
...in 2004 by the ICJ in its advisory opinion of the wall, where it basically said the right of self-defense under Article 51 only exists in relation to other states and not to a territory it occupies. But I do think that while he's legally correct, I do think, first of all, that the judges, or a majority of them, are probably going to look at it more from the vantage point that Norm has described, rather than from the technically legal correct points that he makes. And even more importantly, I suspect they're not even going to get into this issue, because if we look at the two other cases, okay, it was a different court and it was in a different period, but I think they will just stick strictly to the need to uphold the Genocide Convention, and probably on the pretext our business is the Genocide Convention, and we're not going to get into the nitty-gritty of this ongoing armed conflict. If I could just make one more point. Another responsibility that Israel as an occupying power has, Israel has many more responsibilities towards the Palestinian population of Gaza than a party to an armed conflict would normally have towards the civilian population in enemy territory, in a foreign state, because the Gaza Strip is an occupied territory. And so therefore Israel actually has a positive obligation to ensure the provision of humanitarian supplies to the population of the Gaza Strip. So it has even less of an excuse to prohibit the entry of food, of water, of fuel, of medical supplies, and so on, than it would have in an interstate conflict.
I just want to make sure that... Go ahead. I'm sorry. I just want to make sure I understood Mouin's argument, because it sounds to me earlier when I kind of brought up what Mokhyber just brought up there in the beginning, pushing back against you a little bit, Norm. I don't quite understand. You made the argument that the specifics about what kind of constitutes genocide on the ground are details we're not going to get into. That's kind of separate and apart from this other broader question, and made this argument that they would resolve this at a higher level without getting into the broader conflict. But it does seem to be these questions that might not be literally about genocide, but these sub-questions about humanitarian crossing humanitarian lines, whether it's collective punishment or the like, go to the question of whether it's genocide.
I read all my chats. Fuck you. I'm reading you right now.
Genocidal intent, especially if you have an obligation to a subpopulation, for example. I'm sorry?
You're totally correct. You're totally correct. There's two ways to look at the question. One way is to look at genocidal statements by the senior officials in the government. But as the two South African representatives said in the proceedings, very rarely do governments announce we're committing a genocide. What was very unusual about the current case, the one brought by South Africa, is you actually could find genocidal statements by senior officials.
And it wasn't just a leaked memo.
Right. Say it out loud publicly.
But in general, the way you prove intent is by the natural, inevitable, inexorable consequences of the actions you're taking on the ground. Mm-hmm. So if the defense minister says we're going to prohibit any food, water, electricity, or fuel to enter Gaza, he doesn't have to say, because we want to kill off the whole population, he doesn't have to state his intent. The natural, inevitable, inexorable consequence of denying the civilian population of any food, fuel, electricity, or water for a protracted period of time is genocide. So the South Africa presentation...
I don't know what it's called when people's mics do this, but they do a thing where their volume is okay, and then it's... I don't know why it happens, but it's happening with Norm's mics so much. It's driving me crazy. Like his normal talking voice is whatever, and there's all these spikes on... I don't know if it's like after consonants or what. Oh my God.
Had two parts. One part was to say we can prove intent on the basis of all these statements, which, as Mouin pointed out, one after another, after another, after another. But they also said, apart from the statements, we can infer genocide from the actions on the ground, which is usually how it's done. You look at the Myanmar case, they looked at the actions of the government and said, based on these actions, there's a plausible case for genocide. Mm-hmm. Now, I don't agree. Let's just be clear about, don't want to get into technicalities because they're actually not even that important. Article 51 is part of the UN Charter. And the UN Charter says that when a country, a state, is the object of attack, or it's normally interpreted also as if an attack is inevitable, irreversible, and you get wind of it, let's say 2 minutes ahead of time, you get wind of it, imminent, then you have the right of self-defense. But under international law, you don't only have the right of self-defense if you're attacked by another state. If that were the case, the United States wouldn't have had a right of self-defense
against Al-Qaeda.
9/11.
Yeah.
We weren't attacked by a state on 9/11. But nobody would argue that if a non-state actor commits a violent breach of your sovereignty, that a state doesn't have the right to self-defense. Of course it does, under international law. The question, so there I disagree with Mr. Mokhyber. They clearly, in my opinion, I looked at the law, studied it, they clearly have a right to self-defense. Where things get very cloudy, in my opinion, are, number one, do you have the right of self-defense against an illegal occupation?
Well, that's his point, right? That's Mokhyber's entire point.
Are you concerned at all with Norm's speed and habit of cutting off? No, because I think having an iPad looks better than having a phone. So I think I feel comfortable having like an iPad out for notes. So because he speaks so slowly, it'll give me a lot of time to like research and like put together like responses and arguments and shit. I think it's fine. So I have no problem with him speaking slowly. Yeah.
Fact that this isn't 9/11, which some people quibble with as well, but that this is a circumstance where we have an occupied territory within Israel, however you want to characterize it, that has its own right to self-defense, including...
Norm's view here is incredibly nuanced. I'm kind of surprised. He said a couple things earlier that were dumb. I wonder if maybe his showing and just like, no, because in law... No, I don't know. Damn, I can't tell. He's a tough nut to crack. Listening to him talk about like the writings on that Charlie Hebdo shit were unhinged. Also, why the fuck... I think he thinks that Russia had like a legitimate... reason for attacking as well. which was also really weird. I don't know if I've read or listened to him talk about this. Russia has a historical right to invade Ukraine. It was like wild. Can I get like a quick audio?
I'll begin my remarks on the Ukraine.
Oh, I think we listened to this on stream.
By noting that just before this program began, I was watching a presentation by Jeffrey Sachs. He was speaking to a Chilean audience. And Jeffrey Sachs, as many of you know, is a very respected economist, and he's been very active on the international scene since his late 20s. He was actually, I think, for worse, not for better. He was a major advisor to Boris Yeltsin beginning in 1992. And in my opinion, but that's not for now, he is significantly culpable.
This is times two, by the way.
For the catastrophe that ensued in Russia under Yeltsin's leadership, a catastrophe of a magnitude such that you could say Yeltsin, with the advice of Jeffrey Sachs, or I should say Jeffrey Sachs, through Yeltsin, was singularly responsible for bringing
this is normal
Vladimir Putin into power. But that's another time and another place.
Okay, we don't have time for this. Okay.
Violently to liberate itself. And so therefore those are directly in tension. And I don't know that I understand what the argument is around Israel having an extremely limited claim to any kind of self-defense because it is the ostensible aggressor in its relationship with Palestine.
Well, go ahead. No, I was just going to say, I very much hope the court surprises us. But I'd be very surprised if they address the issue of a ceasefire at all, and not for these technical legal reasons, but I think primarily for political ones, and that they'll take a very narrow interpretation of their responsibilities when issuing provisional measures. But I very much hope I'm proven wrong.
I want to ask you about that as well, because my understanding was the whole point of the Genocide Convention, and how this is why I'm sorry, I'm blocking his name. The journalist who's been advocating for this for a long time.
Sam Husseini,
exactly. I'm sorry. That's exactly why Sam was pushing for this specifically. Because unlike other treaties and other kind of international obligations, Israel and the United States are kind of selectively not a part of some of them that would cause them to have some accountability. They are both never signatories to the Genocide Convention. And the Genocide Convention creates an obligation for all other signatories to enforce it and to do what they can to stop genocide. Which is why there's an interesting argument for Yemenis doing what they can in the Red Sea to create a blockade. Right.
No, stop. What? No. The Genocide Convention signatories are not obligated to randomly shoot missiles at ships in the ocean to prevent other people from doing what in their judgment is a genocide. That was a wildly stupid statement.
Stop genocide, which is why there's an interesting argument for Yemenis doing what they can in the Red Sea to create a blockade. Right. So even if there is even the most tepid of claims that stop short of saying you must have a ceasefire, it does seem to me that as finding that Israel is engaging in a genocide here creates, as a matter of definition under the Genocide Convention, an obligation of various states to intervene and provide some cover for actors like the Yemenis in the Red Sea to say, in fact, as I think it's already the case, but to say, in fact, that it's you, the United States, who are instigating an illegal, violent action against us. We're the ones who are fulfilling our obligation under this international treaty to do what we can to non-violently intercede on behalf of a population that's undergoing a genocide.
Again, I don't want to get bogged down in the fine points, but I think the argument you just made misses a critical fine point. The ICJ is not passing judgment on whether Israel is committing genocide.
Yes.
They're only passing judgment
on if it's plausible if a genocide is happening, I believe, right?
On whether a plausible case has been made by South Africa.
But that's the first step.
He has a very good understanding of this. Norm clearly read the entire thing. He's read more than me on this. I'm so surprised. His opinion here is so nuanced. How does he cite things in his book? I wonder if people ghostwrite books for him. Anyway, this is good. The conversation on this will be good then, because he's very clearly, very particularly informed about what this case is about.
They're only passing judgment on whether a plausible case has been made by South Africa.
But that's the first step, right?
Right, but you can't say other states have an obligation to prevent genocide if the genocide has not been established.
Correct. He's right. That's why the Yemeni argument is so stupid. Yes.
That won't be for years.
Right, but I understand that, but this is the first step in a process that we're getting to. So whether or not it's now or 4 years from now, knowing that we're building to a world where that is an eventuality or a possible outcome, isn't that what we're talking about? It doesn't have to be tomorrow.
No, you can't take steps to contravene a potential legal outcome 4 years into the future. That's not how this works.
Right, but I'll speak strictly for myself now. I focused on the substance. I didn't realize that even if they establish a plausible case has been made, it still doesn't mean any action will be taken. And certainly the other states to the Genocide Convention aren't under any obligation to do anything, because there's a huge chasm that separates plausible case from verdict. So I didn't realize that, as Mouin knows, because we talk on a very regular basis. I was surprised, and I started to pay close attention to what provisional measures were actually made. Now, you could say there's a plausible case and no provisional measures. That can happen. Or the provisional measures can be very superficial, very anodyne.
Because remember, plausible is a very low standard, correct?
So it's separate things. What I would say, and here we'll maybe switch the topic a little, I totally support the Houthis. Because
what? What? Where did this come from? What?
And here's going to be a personal reaction. And there are several aspects to it. Number one, you'll be surprised perhaps to learn, as I learned, during that horrible Saudi Arabian blockade of blockade of Yemen, between 2015 and 2018, in 3 years, do you know how many Houthis, how many Yemenis died?
Was it like 300,000? It was an insane number of people, I think.
You'll be very surprised, I think.
I think something like 300,000.
I saw it. No, just those 3 years. 88,000.
Oh, just on this 88,000. Sorry. Whoa, fuck. Did we get the same bad information? What the fuck?
Of whom 60% starved to death.
Yeah.
You hear me?
That was insane. The conditions in Yemen are unreal. Jesus Christ.
60% of those 88,000 Yemenis, because of that brutal blockade, starved to death. And for me, the Houthis, sure, there's a religious side to it. I'm not going to deny it. But there is just a fundamental understanding, a human sympathy, a pity for what's being done to the people of Gaza because it was done to them. Now, some people say they're not targeting directly only Israeli vessels or Israeli-bound vessels. I really don't give a damn. I know I can be a stickler for international law, but my view is during the war in Vietnam, I know how much I'm dating myself.
You can't do this like I pick and choose when to apply international law. Remember, if you pick and choose when to apply something, you're never applying it. There's some other more fundamental system that you're utilizing if you're picking and choosing when to apply law, right?
During the war in Vietnam, we had a slogan, one of our slogans. It was no business as usual. Now, when millions, as it turned out, millions of Vietnamese are being killed by our government, we had no right to carry on with business as usual. And the Houthis are sending the same message to the world. You want to continue your trade? You want to continue your business? You want to build your economies while the people of Gaza are facing mass famine? No. Now, you know, even Russia and China abstained in that UN vote attacking the Houthis because they too care about business. They too care about their economy. And the Houthis say their message to the world is, while the people of Gaza are being martyred, there is going to be no business as usual. We will target anyone or everyone who passes through those borders until the people of Gaza are freed from this genocide. Here, ready? As a Jew, I get that. As a Jew, I would have respected any government in the world during the Nazi Holocaust, any people in the world during the Nazi Holocaust who would have done what the Houthis are doing. They say it in very simple, plain, uneducated, unrefined language. You will not destroy the people of Gaza. I deeply resonate to that. You know, I'm going to just tell you one last thing and then you can react because I know you're going to lose your license or something for me saying it, but that's my problem. I take complete responsibility for it. I don't know how many of you have read Rousseau's second discourse on inequality. It happens to be very good. And one of the things he says in the second discourse is men would be monsters. Men would be monsters were it not for the natural feeling of pity. It's pity that humanizes people. And then he takes the next step and says, the more educated you become, the more you develop that rational faculty which enables you to find excuses why not to do anything when others are suffering. And he says, if a person is being murdered outside a philosopher's window, he says, the philosopher puts his hands to his ears and says to himself, perish if you will, I am safe. That's what education does to you. It enables you to suppress and rationalize your natural sense of pity, not to act out of it. And then he has a great line. He says, whenever there's a conflict in the street, you know, two kids beating the daylights out of each other, or two gangs beating the daylights out of each other, he says, quote, the prudent man, the educated man, he walks away. He says, it's always the market woman, whereas we would now say the fish market woman, who intervenes to break it up. She's reacting to her pity. And that's the whole world. The whole world finds all sorts.
Is this true? If I were to go and break down all the countries by like their level of education, are the more educated countries the one that have more violence within them as opposed to the less? Is that like a correlation I would expect to find? Or
sorts of excuses to walk away.
Or deliver high explosives.
Right. Even worse, yeah. They do consider righteous Gentiles, right? In the context of Holocaust education?
I totally agree. The Houthis are so primitive and they carry their spears and they're so backward.
Daggers.
What?
Daggers.
But you know what? They have pity for the people of Gaza.
Do they, though? Do they? Do the Houthis really give a fuck about the people of Gaza?
Because they went through the same thing. And that's why I say, don't mess with the Houthis.
And it's actually a very ancient and sophisticated civilization that goes back a very, very long time and has very much to commend itself.
Well, you know, Biden famously recently said about the Houthis, he was asked about Ansar Allah, he was asked if the strikes were working. He said, let's see, where's this quote?
I think he said, no, but we'll keep bombing.
Yeah, he said, well, if you mean working, by working, are they going to stop the Houthis? No, but are we going to keep doing it? Yes.
And, you know,
just like, I mean,
wait, hold on. Wasn't that quote more like, have they stopped yet? And Biden was like, no, but we're going to keep doing it. I feel like, they're making it sound like he was just saying that like, oh yeah, we're just going to keep bombing them for no reason because we're so fucking evil. Let me check.
Strikes in Yemen working. Well, When you say working, are they stopping the Houthis? No. Are they going to continue? Yes.
I mean, like, I feel like the clear and obvious is that, like, the Houthis haven't stopped yet, but we're gonna keep doing it until they do. Not that, like, we're just bombing for no fucking reason. What? Come on.
I can't believe the stuff he says out loud, which is true to his credit, but.
And some people have been suggesting that it's a whole new ballgame now that Yemen is being bombed by the Americans and the British. But let's not forget, the Saudis were bombing Yemen with some of the most advanced American weaponry. They had highly trained pilots. They had targeting intelligence from the U.S. intelligence services, and they had boots on the ground. So the idea that the Americans are going to succeed where the Saudis failed because the Americans are American is I think, a pipe dream.
They also, it was a great rebranding exercise that Biden did. He did this. He presented himself as such a departure from Trump on several things, including on the Saudi war in Yemen, right? And then all he does is say, okay, we're not going to support their defensive. We're only going to support their defensive military moves, not their offensive ones, as if Saudi Arabia is defending itself from Yemen.
The worst years.
That was a pretty big deal, no? The United States no longer supporting the Saudi-led coalition against massive military attacks into Yemen? I feel like that was a pretty big deal. We used to be involved in a lot of intel and I think even drone strikes in Yemen, and us saying we're no longer going to do that, I thought that was pretty good. Us generally basically pulling out of Iraq, us not having as much of a military involvement in Syria, us finally leaving Afghanistan. I feel like Biden's U.S. foreign policy has seen a departure from a lot of traditional theaters of war, and then our involvement has been better in where we are involved. I feel like that's the case.
Incidentally, we're during Obama. And what's her name? Samantha Power said nothing.
There's a problem from hell.
Yeah.
Well, I have to ask you this, Norm, because I'm sure people raise this with you. The fact that the Ansar Allah, they part of their charter or some official document of theirs says "curse the Jews."
It's their slogan. I think death to America, death to Israel.
No,
curse the Jews.
Yeah.
Now,
I don't
know what I say to that, but I
don't get hot under the collar about those things, and not because I'm giving people a pass. Israel describes itself as the state of the Jewish people. Right. What do you expect these people? Exactly. Have they ever met a Jew who was nice to them? I doubt it. So they conflate the two.
Okay, but now what if you were Israeli and you're like, have you ever met a nice Arab? Come on, there's no way he would let the other statements stand, right?
Let Israel, call itself by the name. It's all, call itself the state of the Nazi people, and that problem wouldn't arise. So then they would say they hate Nazis, and then the matter would disappear. So I don't get, excited about those things. I've said this story before, so you'll forgive me. My parents, as you know, they passed through the Nazi Holocaust, and in later years, they got a lot of the history. They wanted to know what happened to them, what happened to their family. And I remember my father knew Russian. He learned it late in life, but he knew Russian, and he was reading a Russian book on the Nazi Holocaust. Okay, and he came over to me and he said, "This is a good book. I like this book." So why do you like this book, Dad? He said to me, because they don't talk about they don't talk about the Nazis. They talk about the Germans. He hated that distinction because for him, you have to understand, for him, my mother, every German was a Nazi. They didn't meet other Germans. It's not as if they went to Germany and they went and saw some Wagner in an opera house.
For them, also a Nazi.
Right. For them, they only knew Germans as Nazis. So I never tried to persuade my father. I remember I once asked my mother, I said, "Mom, do you ever remember meeting," because I was trying to make, the humanistic argument. Right. I said, "Mom, did you ever see a German who wasn't utterly vile and horrible?" I wouldn't use the word vile, horrible. She said to me, one time, I saw one German who seemed to have been not happy with what was going on. One, you get me? One. And so the Houthis, all they see of Jews is what Israel is doing to Gaza, Israel is doing to Lebanon, Israel is doing here, Israel is doing there. I can't get excited about that. It's not because I give a pass to anti-Semitism. It's because you have to look at the context. And I understood where my father's coming from, and I'm not going to hold somebody else to a more stringent standard than I held my own parents.
This is like the thing that I don't like about Norm, okay? Like, I think that that's a pretty decent argument. If somebody were to come up to me and be like, what do you think about the Houthis, slogans about death to Israel, death to Israel? It's like, yeah, I get it. I mean, I understand why they wouldn't necessarily be fans of us for a variety of reasons. Given what they've been involved in, that's fine and that's fair. And you can even be sympathetic towards things that have happened, to Palestinians and why Hamas might attack Israel or why Palestinians might support Hamas. But why do you only apply that charity to one side? Why does he not apply that same lens to, why do Jewish people or why do Israelis feel this way about Arabs or Arab states or Palestinians or Hamas? Why is it applied so selectively? I don't understand that. Like, the analysis is actually insightful and very nuanced when talking about some groups of people, but then for other people, it's so one-dimensional.
Yeah, I totally agree with what you're saying. That Israel can't conflate Jewishness and Zionism and then get upset when people use those terms interchangeably, which is just another example of Israel making Israel and AIPAC and the ADL and every single other person who conflates being a Jew with being a Zionist. Those are the people making Jews unsafe. Some of the people, not the only ones.
Briahna, you're falling silent. Unusual for you.
I know that I have a lot to contribute here, Norm. You're telling, I think, you and Katie are speaking to your perspective largely as Jews and how you interpret or how you respond to the statement that apparently is part of a Houthi slogan or however you want to characterize it. And that makes sense to me. I can reason by analogy as a black person have similar feelings about, some attitudes certain older members of my family have, for instance, toward white people or certain other groups. And that makes sense to me, but I don't know that it's really on me to say which Jewish people should or should not be offended by the Ansar Allah slogan here.
I'm going to ask you a question, Briahna, because your name came up in my mind when I was reading something, and I want to hear your reaction. As you guys know, Briahna and I had a disagreement about the slogan "From the river to the sea, our flag will be free."
Oh, actually. Because hold on. Why do you provide so much charity to people like the Houthis slogan, Hamas/Palestinians, but seemingly no understanding to Israelis? Because he'll do all this thing from the river to the sea, this is what it actually means, blah, 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 and then he'll do this thing for the Houthi slogan, but I wonder, now I'm strawmanning him a bit because I don't know if he's actually said this, what's that fucking Jewish word? Like Amalek or Amlak? Amtrak? The fuck is the, what's it called? What is this word? Amalek? Where, like, if a Jewish person says this word, people like lose their mind. And it's like, oh my God, this is it. They've identified them as the Amalek. They're going to fucking genocide and destroy them because of this historical blah, blah, blah. Like, it feels so one-sided. Amalek. Norman Finkelstein. I wonder if he says anything about this word. Publication not available. Cringe. It says archived. How is there not like an archive version of this available, or? November 12th, 2023. Damn, he's got all sorts of quotes in here. I guess he's just finding quotes that written and compiled by Yaniv Kogan and Jamie Sternweiner. Sternweiner? I don't even know if this is written by him. All right, I don't know.
So a few days ago, Syed Nasrallah, the head of Hezbollah, he gave a major speech in Lebanon, which I did email to Mouin. Did you have a chance to read it?
I did.
Okay, so you'll confirm or deny what I'm saying. And at one point, Nasrallah raised the issue of from the river to the sea. And he said, from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free, basically. And then he said, all those Jews in Israel, he doesn't go Israel, the Zionist entity, all those Jews have double passports. There are Israeli Brits, Israeli French, they all have double passports. He then said, Israel is not really a nation. Israeli Jews aren't really a nation. Because whenever there's trouble, they run away. That's what he said. Real nations, they stay put and they fight. He says, the Israelis, no, they run away. And then he said, well, from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. The land belongs...
Hold on. Wait, who said that in what context?
From the river to the sea, Palestine will be free, basically. And then he said, all those Jews in Israel, he doesn't go Israel, the Zionist entity, all those Jews have double passports. There are Israeli Brits, Israeli French, they all have double passports. He then said, Israel is not really a nation. Israeli Jews aren't really a nation. Because whenever there's trouble, they run away. That's what he said. Real nations, they stay put and they fight. He says, the Israelis, no, they run away. And then he said, well...
From the leader of Hezbollah? In what year did he say this?
To the sea, Palestine will be free. The land belongs to the indigenous population, the Palestinians. All the Jews should leave. And when I read that, is that accurate, Mouin?
I'm not entirely certain. I don't remember that specific passage, whether...
Because that's like the opposite of what happened in 48. I think one of Israel's biggest benefits is that they were able to mobilize, like, I think it was like 18% of their population for war. It was like an insane percentage compared to, even though the surrounding Arab states had so many more people, it was an insane percentage of their population. In 1948, Egypt's army was able to put a maximum of around 40,000 men into the field. 80% of its military-age male population were unfit for military service, and its embryonic logistics system was limited in its ability to support ground forces beyond its borders. What was the... Fuck, can I find this? I'm not able to find the number. I think it was either 17 or 18%, I think.
He was advocating that they should leave, or whether he was advocating that...
There's a difference between the prime minister of one of the world's largest military forces making the Amalek statements and the Houthis? No, there's not.
I'm not entirely certain.
You should analyze the conditions and the context, everything surrounding all of it. Greenwald goes nuclear in Destiny, talking ish about Melina divorce in the same breath as the Vosh folder leak, partisan hack, part of the subculture with sketch, Vosh, clapback. What? Oh, yeah, he's crazy. Glenn did a whole stream on us last night or the day before, yeah.
Remember that specific passage, whether...
Do you think you would have lost the debate with Finkelstein if the debate had happened? You seem much more informed now. I don't know. Back then, I wanted it to be a much more narrow debate. I still think I would have crushed him on the Marmara, whatever, the ship shit, because his citations there are just wacky. But it would have been a far more narrow conversation back then. Obviously, I know more now too, though. But
whether he was advocating that they should leave, or whether he was advocating that those who don't like it should leave.
I would say the first. Mm-hmm. His next statement was, it belongs to the indigenous population. Mm-hmm. So when I read that, I thought about you, Briahna, and I thought to myself, well, that's exactly the argument I was making, that it's a legitimate interpretation of from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. That a legitimate interpretation is that everybody who's not Jewish doesn't belong there and should leave.
You mean everyone who's not Arab?
Right. It's not their country. They're not really a nation. They should get up and leave. And would you accept that as a legitimate interpretation of that slogan? That's my first question, because that's how Nasrallah interpreted it. And secondly, do you think that's a legitimate demand?
Can I just say quickly that people, and then Bree, take it away. I just want to say there are obviously still people who use that phrase who don't mean that. So the fact that Nasrallah does it to mean that doesn't mean that other people don't mean something else. But
right, I would say.
Well, I mean, what else could it mean? What else does it mean?
First of all, the Likud party, whose charter in existence is older than Hamas, has in their foundational charter the phrase "between the sea and Jordan there will be only Israeli sovereignty." That is at no point in time ever interpreted to be a genocidal statement, even though I would argue that the behavior of the
Likud charter. What does it actually say? Original party platform of the Likud party. The right of the Jewish people to the land of Israel is eternal and indisputable and is linked with the right to security and peace. Therefore, Judea and Samaria will not be handed to any foreign administration. Between the sea and the Jordan, there will only be Israeli sovereignty. A plan which relinquishes parts of Western Eretz Israel, undermines our right to the country, unavoidably leads to the establishment of a Palestinian state, jeopardizes the security of the Jewish population, endangers the existence of the state of Israel, and frustrates any prospect of peace. Okay, so this is true. This basically says fuck you to the entire West Bank. Judea and Samaria. I can't spell this fucking shit. Is there like a distinction between like Judea and Samaria? Or yeah, okay. Judea is the southern part, Samaria is the... Okay, I always heard them refer to it together. Oh, okay. The Likud government will place its aspirations for peace at the top of its priorities and will spare no effort to promote peace. The Likud will act as a genuine partner at peace treaty negotiations with other neighbors. As is customary among the nations, the Likud government will attend the Geneva Conference. The Likud government's peace initiative will be positive, directly or through a friendly state. Israel will invite her neighbors to hold negotiations in order to sign without preconditions on either side and without any solution formula invented by outsiders. At the negotiation, each party will be free to make any proposals it seems fit. Settlement, both urban and rural, in all parts of the land of Israel is the focal point of the Zionist effort to redeem the country. The PLO is no national liberation organization, but an organization of assassins, which the Arab countries use as a political military tool, while also serves the interests of the Soviet imperialists. Sources. Okay. So when it says genuine peace is our central objective for this party platform, it's probably referring to peace with only neighboring states, not actually Palestinians, is what this reference is for genuine peace.
Likud party is certainly much more genocidal than anything that Hamas or any other Palestinian entity has ever put into effect. You put forward that apparently the Hamas leader has made similar statements, and we just heard Netanyahu, there's some dispute around the translation, making the same or similar statements. I think substantively, even though the translation is a little different, it sounds just like Likud party statements, even if it's not the exact words. The point is,
Destiny, what an autistic conclusion to come to when you hear genuine peace. What are you talking about?
Saying west of the Jordan River should be Israel, and not anything Palestinian. I don't believe you should stop saying words that you believe simply because someone else who's bad uses the same framing or same phrase. I think there were people who...
Oh, so really? So I can rap the N-word. Thank you.
Said, let's say, black power and black militancy, who are more militant and more open to the idea of killing white people than others who said black power and just basically meant you should have a good self-esteem and love your natural hair. And I don't think the flexibility and the expansiveness of the English language should put me in some defensive position where I'm not allowed to use words that are meaningful to me and that I am perfectly happy to clarify and explain if anybody wants to ask me a follow-up question. I don't think that I should be running away from my own phraseology simply because other people in the world want to mimic my words. If that's the standard, then you can easily see that any slogan adapted can be weaponized by any bad faith actor through the simple act of mimicry. Someone could say, ceasefire.
I'd probably believe Briahna, but I'm curious if she ever hunted people who were like using Pepe the Frog as like a symbol of Nazism, or the OK symbol as like a symbol of alt-right, like people that would co-opt these things.
Now actually means that Hamas must stand down. And so therefore I'm going to protest in the street, ceasefire now, but I am a Zionist entity, and saying ceasefire now means Hamas needs to do a ceasefire now. And if Zionists want to organize like that and try to co-opt that language and write op-eds in the New York Times, they might be able to get some traction there. Does that mean I'm going to stop saying ceasefire now? My fundamental argument with you, Norm, is that this would be a more compelling case on your end if the ceasefire now side of things, if the Israel committing a genocide view of things weren't an ascending point of view, but hearts and minds weren't being won in larger and larger numbers. If 66% of Americans and almost 80% of Democrats weren't in line with the view that Israel needs to do a ceasefire, that they're behaving disproportionately, and the sheer volume of human death in Gaza is unconscionable. But I just don't understand why I would be at all in taking a defensive posture and changing my language, but not mine literally, but the pro-Palestinian advocates' language, when they are winning this rhetorical battle for the first time in the history of this conflict. More people, especially in the younger age group, are more sympathetic to Palestinians than to Israelis.
Let me hear Mouin.
Well, I think I agree with Briahna. I mean, from the river to the sea means different things to different people. And just because you use a particular word or phrase or slogan differently than I do, doesn't make me responsible for the way that you use it. I mean, it's a bit like saying you can't call yourself a communist without taking responsibility for the Cambodian genocide. So that would be my first statement. You and I can have ascribed very different meanings to the same concept, and that doesn't make either of them illegitimate, or rather, if I mean something in a certain way, I can't be held responsible for the meaning you ascribe to that. The second point I would make is
it's going to be a hard debate.
I'm not aware that this is, I mean, I'm assuming what you're saying about Nasrallah is correct. I'm not aware of this consistently being his position in recent years, whether he's referred to this point at all, and if he has, whether he's made it. And I would argue that it also reflects, in a sense, genocide blowback. Not that Hezbollah was ever a proponent of a negotiated peace with Israel, but I think what you're seeing now is that there is a sector of society that was previously amenable to either peaceful coexistence with Israel as a state or peaceful coexistence with Israeli Jewish society, that as a result of the genocidal campaign Israel has waged during the past 3 months, is no longer prepared to entertain such notions. People have come to oppose the very principle of peaceful coexistence with a genocidal state, even if they still believe that theoretically peaceful coexistence with Israel could be possible. And again, for many people, that means that the Israeli state must be dismantled and that Israeli Jewish society will have to accept living as equals in that territory. And for other people, like this statement, it means that those who immigrated from elsewhere should return to their lands of origin. So there's, again, different ways of looking at the same issue.
I would just add, I think there are two aspects, as I've said in private conversation with Mouin and my other young colleague and comrade, J.B. Stern-Weiner. There are two aspects. Number one, as Mouin says, after the commission in broad daylight of a genocide, it's hardened the other side for very understandable reasons about the prospect of living in peaceful coexistence. But I believe, as I've said to Mouin, and you can comment now, there's the other side. The other side is October 7th transmitted the message far and wide that Israel is not invincible.
It's vulnerable.
And that there is a military option against it. We don't have to compromise with it. Lo and behold, this ragtag army succeeded in a way that they didn't even imagine. They didn't realize it was so easy to penetrate the perimeter of Israel. They were shocked. And so the willingness to enter into any kind of compromise has been significantly undermined by the prospect. Why do we need to compromise with it? Victory is within reach.
That's
well, I wanted to, oh, sorry, Mouin, do you want to respond to that?
No, I just said, that's.
He's, on a historical level, he's correct. But this is a recognition that needs to happen on both sides, and it's questionable if Hamas will recognize this. So I think that in the Middle East, this might be true for the whole world, but in the Middle East, having a strong diplomatic arm and a strong military arm have both been necessary for either side to recognize each other's potential for conflict and potential for peace. After 67, when Israel conquered so much territory, Israel didn't rush to make peace with her neighbors. Israel wanted to fight everybody. They were like, fuck it, we have this shit. We've got this on lock. We took all this territory. We're, victorious. We're so good. And then when Egypt tried to make peace in 71, 72, Israel shut it down. Golda Meir was the prime minister. She said, fuck you. We don't want peace. We actually don't give a fuck. We don't believe you. We don't care. And it wasn't until Yom Kippur where Israel was like, oh shit. Okay, maybe we need to be more careful because we got caught lacking. Okay, that Israel's like, okay, fuck, we'll make peace. Yeah, let's do this. But Egypt was willing to do it as well. If Hamas has revealed to Israel that they can fight and cause damage, and Israel's like, okay, well, fuck, we can't just ignore them. Maybe we have to consider something. Hamas also needs to be willing to be like, well, okay, hey, look, we've showed that we can do something. Now let's like talk and consider something. But the nature of the attacks is so much different because Hamas is full on terrorist, whereas Egypt was more militarily minded. The nature of the attacks is different. The type of give is different. Jews, regardless of what they say, didn't really care about the Sinai that much. It's not as important to Jewish people, even though there were settlements there. So giving up that land was easier. Giving up land in Gaza or the West Bank or having some... Also, who you're negotiating with is different too, right? Egypt was represented by a secular dictatorship at the time. The Palestinians are not. They don't have a cohesive leader. So it's more challenging. Like just being able to do a show of force isn't enough on the Palestinian side because it's hard to know if there's a cohesive, peaceful diplomatic arm behind that that's willing to settle on something that both sides can agree with.
That's part of it as well. You also had a particular point of view, which is, well, we may not want to coexist peacefully with Israel, but given the power disparity, it's something we'll have to learn to live with. And as Norm points out, those people will now be looking at the equation and say, well, maybe it's different. Israel is vulnerable. Israel can be defeated. Will Israel survive a prolonged war of attrition on multiple fronts and so on?
That's why I'm very, very skeptical about any possibility of this conflict ending soon. Because Israel's most central goal has always been, from the point of view of foreign policy internationally, has been to maintain what it calls its deterrence capacity, namely the Arab world's fear of it. And after October 7th, its deterrence capacity collapsed. It was
the Iron Wall melted.
Yes, it was a catastrophe. And they're now in a...
Like, this stuff also is a little bit delusional. You can't be saying shit like this because you're hyping up Palestinians and you're unfairly, like... This is not true. Israel's deterrence capacity melted. Like, I guess it's true. It goes along with if you think that Israel is truly carpet bombing the Gaza Strip and they're doing everything they can to attack at a strip, but that's clearly not true. If Israel wanted to up its aggression towards Palestinians, Israel has the capacity to do it to a far greater level. To say that the deterrence capacity is completely gone is just silly, I think. On a larger, like, regional sense, maybe kind of, but it's way more nuanced than this, I think.
State of complete panic. They can't seem to be able to inflict a military defeat on Hamas. They are being mocked and taunted and also at war, low-level war, but still war, with Hezbollah in the north, which means on every front and in totality, their deterrence capacity has been reduced to a near zero.
Well, like the deterrence capacity is being reduced, but not because of military reasons, but because of international pressure reasons, right?
Genocide hasn't restored it.
And genocide hasn't restored it. And so they are going to do what it takes, because that's their primary goal, to restore their deterrence capacity. The Arab world is fear of it.
The only hope is that the U.S. cuts it off.
You got it backwards. Golda Meir tried to broker peace by giving back most of the Sinai before 73. I haven't heard of that before. If that's true, if you have a link or source for that, that'd be interesting. I have not heard of that before.
Did any of you happen to see that, I guess you could call it a protest, where some of the families of hostage victims broke into some, like a roundtable meeting, and they had to be dragged out, and they were screaming, criticisms of Netanyahu and saying, we can live with Palestinians. We can live with them. You're the bigger obstacle. We need our families home. Did you see that clip?
I watched it. It made me a little bit sad that our side hasn't found that kind of courage. Not that young people haven't been fantastic, they've been fantastic, but breaking into the Congress and doing what these folks did. Right?
They did disrupt Blinken's testimony to Congress early on, holding up.
Yeah, I see it less as an indictment than anybody in America says. There's certainly many more. 400,000 people in the most recent protests in D.C. There's so many more. Frankly, the volume of the protests in Israel has been pretty bigger, although I don't think them either, because it's so stigmatized there, and there's so much authoritarianism in terms of people, history teachers getting arrested for Facebook posts and things like that. So no judgment on either side, but just to the extent that there is a kind of radicalization, perhaps on the Arab side of this equation, saying, well, Israel is perhaps more vulnerable now than we understood, and we're going to be less compromising. I think it's interesting to consider whether or not on the other side in Israel there's perhaps a softening to the idea that the only way peace is going to come is through compromise, because they do see themselves as vulnerable. They are starting to see Netanyahu as making them more vulnerable, and at least the people who are directly connected to hostages certainly see the stated policy of Netanyahu's government as making them, or at least their family members, less safe. And I'm not trying to pretend that there's some enormous sea change happening in Israel, but even that level of demonstration, even that level of rhetoric seems to be very unique and a departure from much of what we've seen before. Not to mention there were the protests earlier last year before October 7th that were prehistoric in nature. Again, not exactly liberal bastion or anything, but a strong condemnation of the extreme right-wingness of the Likud government.
There have been precedents for that. When Israel occupied South Lebanon, approaching the year 2000, there were large numbers of Israeli soldiers who were being killed. And then there was a mothers movement formed in Israel.
Four Mothers, I think it was called initially.
I can hear you?
Four Mothers, I think it was called initially.
Yeah, it was mothers who demanded the withdrawal from South Lebanon, and that gradually ballooned, and it was considered one of the precipitant factors in the decision in June or July 2000, I think, right, to withdraw from Israel's occupying Lebanon from 1983, really from 1978, actually, and that forced the withdrawal. My view is, as you know, right now, there's talk about a deal being brokered in which there would be a 2-month ceasefire, and Hamas would give up all the hostages in exchange for a 2-month ceasefire. I find that very improbable. Netanyahu is facing, as you just pointed out, huge domestic pressure over the hostages, because most of the people were shouting at the legislators, what if it were your children? What would you do if it was your family? And highly personalizing it. So there is huge...
I'm curious what the difference is here, because if if Egypt was trying to make peace, but Golda Meir shot it down, I don't know what Golda Meir trying to make peace, but Egypt shooting it down. I would need more context for this. I'm curious how this what was going on here. I don't know.
Domestic pressure to get the hostages back. So I do think Israel will say that there will be a 2-month ceasefire if the hostages are returned. But the moment the hostages are returned, there will be near perfect unanimity to bomb Gaza into the Stone Age, to restore that deterrence capacity and to destroy Hamas. And that will include all those terrorists who are shouting in the Knesset, in my view. So as you all know, it's very easy to fabricate an excuse. So the moment the hostages are freed, you will recall in 1939, when Hitler needed an excuse to invade Poland, he fabricated a border incident. So he had his pretext for invading Poland, our country. 1964, the Gulf of Tonkin incident, another fabrication. That's a long history. So they will just fabricate the moment the hostages are released, the domestic pressure is lifted, and they will destroy Gaza. So
the polls show that even people who don't support Netanyahu support his use of force against Gazans. I just wanted to, you guys have been so generous with your time, I want to ask you about one final thing, which is that this weekend, Hamas put out a document. It's kind of like almost an explainer. I think it's a 16-page document. It's almost like an explainer on October 7th and also an explainer on Hamas itself. I wanted to know what you guys thought of that document and if there was anything that you found noteworthy in it.
Who's the question to?
You or Norman?
When you go, because I've read it.
Or me too.
I thought it was an interesting document because if you look at Hamas propaganda generally,
yeah, in the document they say we would never target civilians. In this particular document that was released,
particularly since October 7th, it has been very much directed at domestic public opinion, Arab public opinion, and to a lesser extent at seeking to influence Israeli public opinion. What I thought was different about this text, it was published in both Arabic and in English translation, is that Hamas also seeks to address an international audience, which is something that as a rule they have refrained from doing, and when they have done it, have not done particularly well. On this occasion, I think they were trying to send several messages. First of all, explaining the context of October 7th. In other words, history did not start on October 7th. There's a whole context there that led Hamas to the conclusion that it had no alternative to conducting these attacks. Secondly, it spent a considerable number of time seeking to refute many of the most lurid allegations against the movement. You know, for example, featuring reports about their actions that have been disproven, such as babies being burnt in ovens and beheaded. You know, the images Biden saw that don't exist, and so on. And also strongly rejecting the allegations of mass rape and sexual violence, and so on. I mean, the document states that as a matter of moral and religious principle, Hamas is prohibited from attacking civilians. Well, that may be true as a moral principle and as a religious principle, but of course Hamas does have a record of targeting civilians, for example, during the Second Intifada. So on this occasion, it went out of its way in this document to seek to demonstrate that it was primarily going after military targets. And then the final part of that document is forward-looking, going back to the earlier discussion about the Houthis. Here, Hamas makes the point that we are not fighting Jews and we are not fighting Israel.
Do you plan to take a confrontational approach from the start? No, I always match energy. I mean, like, there's a potential for it to be a really good conversation. I'm not going to turn it into shit slinging for no reason. That would be a crime.
Because of their Jewish faith, we are fighting Israel because of its Zionist policies, and so it makes a clear distinction between Judaism and Zionism. And I think, given all the accusations that Hamas is a genocidal movement, no different from ISIS, dedicated, to slaughter Jews everywhere, I think they've gotten the message that these are the accusations against them, and they seek to refute them. And they basically finally emphasize that the only solution here is implementation of the Palestinian right to self-determination, ceasefire, holding Israel accountable. And crucially, they call on the International Criminal Court to investigate all allegations, and not just those against their enemies. And there was one more point about the conclusion. Oh, and they make the point that no leadership can be imposed upon the Palestinians. And this is the response to all these various day-after scenarios that are premised on removing Hamas from the equation and from any participation in Palestinian political life.
They say, I just want to quote them because it'll be ignored, but I think it's relevant. Hamas affirms that its conflict is with the Zionist project, not with the Jews because of their religion. Hamas does not wage a struggle against the Jews because they are Jewish, but wages a struggle against the Zionists who occupy Palestine. Yet it is the Zionists who constantly identify Judaism and the Jews with their own colonial project and legal entity. It sounds like something I'd say on the show and have said on the show, which I'm sure people will use against me.
Well, maybe you're the author of the document.
Yeah, it's true. There were a couple mistakes that suggested it wasn't English as the first language, so it wasn't
just make sure you secured your royalties.
Right, yeah. I'm on the payroll.
I'd make 2 comments, always being a stickler for the facts. I was looking very carefully in the first part. Do they get their numbers right? And do they get, elementary factual questions right?
Keep in mind, this is going to be Hamas propaganda as well, right? They may or may not believe these messages. It's clearly aimed at an international audience. They identified the latter. Do they understand the former? Because when we look at stuff that Israel says, we would also treat this as propaganda potentially. But are we going to take all of this document at face value? Or
basically, they never did. But this time the numbers were right. Actually, believe it or not, in some cases, the numbers were understated when you compare it to conventional estimates of various things. So that was, I thought, a good thing to see, that they were trying to be precise and accurate. The second thing is the point Mouin said, which is actually a very surprising thing, I have to say. Namely, this issue of them saying, we will cooperate with the ICC, we will cooperate with investigative bodies. This came up during the current round when the attack occurred in Al Ali Hospital. And Human Rights Watch put out a report that said the evidence seems to support the claim that that attack was caused by Hamas, a misfired Hamas rocket. And I do know a person in Hamas, and so I emailed him to ask whether he would support an international investigation to confirm who was responsible for that. And his reply came as a surprise to me. He said, yes, of course. Yes, of course. And of course, I ran with that and began to ask Human Rights Watch, why didn't you conduct an investigation in cooperation with Hamas? You say Hamas has critical evidence. You say that, or everybody says, examining the actual site of the landing of the rocket is critical to determining who was responsible. Well, Hamas says, we'll let you look at our evidence. We'll let you look at the site. They said, yes, of course. And I was surprised here that again they said, yes, we're not afraid. We're not afraid. I would have been, frankly, I would have been afraid because there can't really be any doubt, I don't think, but feel free to disagree with me, that Hamas atrocities did occur on October 7th. Or am I wrong about that, Mouin?
No, that sounds right. I think probably their perspective is, first of all, that Israel has much more to lose than does Hamas. I mean, when is the last...
Quran in Surah 424 says, and forbidden to you are wedded wives of other people except those who have fallen in your hands as prisoners of war. Thank you, Tatiana. I don't know why you said that, but okay.
It's time that Hamas leader changed plans to go on a shopping spree in London or Paris because of fear of arrest. That's number one. And number two, if they were seen to be obstructing an international investigation, that would make things very difficult for them domestically as well.
They also point out in their document that the way that Israel allegedly killed people on October 7th, they go through those different claims.
They actually call it, believe it or not,
Israeli
one of the central sources, brace yourself, was Mondo Weiss.
Oh yeah, Mondo Weiss, yeah, and Israeli newspapers as well. Yeah.
If I may, it's quite possible that they have concluded that they don't deny that there were killings of civilians. They just deny responsibility for them. They say either it was Israelis or unruly elements or crossfire. It's possible that they're genuinely convinced that's the case. But I assume there are some people with responsibility for the release of this report that know better and nevertheless felt that a impartial, thorough investigation would make the Israelis look very, very much worse than it does.
In contrast,
well, look who's being accused of genocide in the world's highest court.
I was just in contrast that with Israel, which has refused to cooperate with any UN investigation into allegations of sexual assault by Hamas on October 7th.
Exactly.
I'm going to just leave off one comment. I would just be curious to hear the reaction. I had a visitor yesterday. He was Palestinian. He's a cardiologist. He lives in Germany. He was in New York for a conference at Princeton. And I asked him about the question of the rapes. What's his opinion on what happened in that regard? And his answer was, it's impossible that they committed the rapes for the following reason. He said because that particular crime is viewed with such a revulsion in Arab, Muslim, or Palestinian society that if any person came back and it became known that he had committed a rape, he would be totally ostracized in Gazan society, and he could never, ever have a wife. It could not happen.
I don't put too much store in these cultural explanations for why something did or didn't happen. As we know, sexual violence and armed conflict are bedfellows, so to speak.
Transcultural.
And I find it entirely plausible that there was sexual violence. The real question, I think, that needs to be investigated is whether there was mass organized sexual violence, because that's really the allegation. That's the New York Times and Israeli spokespeople and so on are not condemning the Palestinians because one or two or three.
That's a good distinction.
Three Palestinians that entered into Israel on October 7th participated in or conducted acts of sexual violence. They're saying this was widespread, systematic, and organized. Okay. And that I personally haven't seen any evidence for it. I don't think there's any evidence for it. So let's have an investigation. And if Israel insists on not cooperating with an investigation, I think the stories should be not about Israel's allegations, but about Israel's refusal to cooperate with an investigation.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, there's so many cultures that have reputations or kind of self-described narratives of being respectful or more conservative and the like, whether it's, Mormons or Hasidic Jews or whatnot, that whose communities have been rife with allegations of sexual misconduct. So I also am wary of cultural explanations for it. And I wouldn't also damn anybody for being a member of those groups where those kind of relations have come apart because it is come up because it's so ubiquitous. But I also just have never seen a case where someone makes an argument that some group is immune to the vagaries of human existence because of some cultural paradigm and that actually pan out.
I'm just repeating what he said. I've said from the beginning that I was agnostic on the question of rapes and the question of beheadings. Beheadings is gone, by the way. If you look at the ICJ hearings, they no longer mention the beheading. Yeah. So that's over.
Okay, it's done its damage.
Exactly. As Mouin likes to say, their aim is not to convince you. Their aim is to confuse you. If you throw enough confusion, then you've won. You don't have to convince. And I think that was a shrewd observation by Mouin, and I kept it.
Well, thank you so much. You guys have been so wonderful and so generous with your time. Love this discussion. Let's do it again. Maybe we can react when the ICJ releases its opinion. And where can people find everyone here? Where can people find you guys?
Norm?
I live at 2245.
You'll get a combo of stalker fans and haters, outside your door.
I publish most of what I publish on Jadaliya. That's JADALIYYA.com. It's also where my podcast is hosted, and I can also be found on Twitter.
Great. You guys are already on YouTube, so you can find me at Bad Faith YouTube. Feel free to subscribe so you don't miss new drops. And also, I'm over at The Hill Monday through Thursdays at The Hills Rising. You can just Google that, where I co-host the show with Robbie Suave. And for more Bad Faith, you can subscribe at patreon.com/badfaithpodcast for an extra episode every week.
And
And
I'm sorry, Crystal didn't make it.
yeah,
But for whatever reason, Briahna, Katie, and
Okay. Well, we watched all this. Okay. Okay, tomorrow we will concise up our questions and stuff for, I think, Finkelstein. And then make sure we have all of our shit down. And then I think the next few days are just going to be condensing all of our stuff for the debate. Yeah. But, okay. I love you guys. I will be back. I'm probably gonna read through that entire ICJ thing tonight. Oh, and is Israel still an occupying power in Gaza? This paper was written in 2016. All right. Briahna, cappuccino, pappuccino, hoppuccino, mappuccino, dappuccino, cappuccino, appuccino, alpuccino, my dude knows. I will catch you guys next stream arena. Be careful.